Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everybody. In accordance with the provisions of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, notice is hereby given that the Zoning Board of Appeals is meeting tonight, Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, 7 p.m. right here in the Town Hall Meeting Room number 124. Members of the public are welcome to attend this in person or at 1 Liberty Lane, Norfolk, Mass., or by remote Zoom connection provided. Please note that the in-person meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technical problems interrupt the remote connection. Remote connections were given and are listed on the hearing on the website. Thank you. I think we have a first public hearing. Go ahead, read it in, Joe.
Notice hereby given in accordance with Chapter 40A of the Massachusetts General Laws and any and all amendments thereto, that a public hearing will be held by the Zoning Board of Appeals in Room 124 in Norfolk Municipal Building on November 20th, 2024 at 7 p.m. The application by George Bentley for an appeal of the Building Commissioner's Zoning Enforcement Officer's decision in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A, Section 8, and the Norfolk zoning bylaws, Section 310, 6.5E, mobile home. The property is located at 6 Baltimore Street, reference Assessors Map 10, Block 34, Lot 163, in the R3 zoning district.
Thank you. All right, let's open the hearing. You are here presently? Very good.
Yes.
All right.
Want to have them
I think we want you to come up and introduce yourselves. I think it's a Mr. Bentley is, okay, come on up. Grab a microphone or sit on that table. There's a microphone right there.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So, we understand you're in violation of putting a mobile home on your property while construction happens on the house.
It's not a mobile home, it's a camper to begin with.
Okay.
I have the pictures right here.
I have. I agree
Thank
with
you.
You're reconstructing
My house,
completely?
correct.
Did you tear, is it a complete tear down and rebuild, or?
2/3 tear down.
Okay.
You have a building permit?
Yes.
Is there a fire or flood that preceded the demolition?
No.
Okay,
And there's
so
no,
that's the issue.
and there's no other, this is the only structure you're living in, there's no other. mobile
Correct.
home.
What were on your site plan, it says existing cabins? Looks like you were there a few structures going on?
It was like
Walk us
a,
through it. Tell us about your
there was
property.
2 different houses.
Okay.
One was like a cottage
Okay.
without any insulation.
Oh.
Built like 70 years ago.
Okay, sounds
And
warm.
the other one was built 30 years ago.
Okay.
Doesn't meet that
So cabins really isn't like plural then, there was kind of a cabin-esque.
No.
Or it's the idea that they were both kind of cabins and that's why it's plural. That's my only confusion, is just on your site plan at the top here where it says,
If I can clarify,
yeah. Were these both considered cabins, Rich? Is that why it's plural, or?
You want to ask?
It's a weird thing, but there's an S, so I'm just asking why.
my name's Emerson
Yeah, it's
Claus.
weird for sure.
I'm his contractor for the project. So it was in one continuous house.
Oh, okay.
It isn't separate cabins. They may have been built that way, but they were all attached. So
With
a
various
little bit of a
additions?
difference. Yep.
Okay.
And the structure is that size right now?
The existing old structure came way out into here, way into the wetlands. The new structure is way back here, much further from the wetlands.
So, Mr. Bentley, if I may, so I think the question is really maybe not whether it was destroyed or not by natural causes, but whether or not this trailer is a mobile home. Is that the issue?
I guess.
Is that your position, that's not a mobile home, that's a trailer?
Right.
I think that's what we have to look at. If you look at the bylaw, and it talks about mobile homes. It doesn't
It's not
talk
a
about
mobile home
it's not
for
a mobile
permanent-
home.
No, that's,
Right. So mobile
Just a
homes
camper.
have certain restrictions and need qualifications, but trailers don't seem to have that. Unless-
It doesn't
that's-
fall
that's-
under
That's
there.
the bylaw referenced
What do you,
here.
what do you think, Mike? I mean, honestly, is it a mobile home or is it not a mobile home?
There's no
That's the
definition.
question.
It's not a mobile home, but it's being used as a mobile home. okay?
Well, being used as a trailer.
The use of it is, that's where
As a
that's where he's
residence.
taken his home from. He's taken his residence out of the dwelling and moved his residence into the trailer.
A home that is mobile.
So I turned to there's no definition in the bylaw, so I turned to the definition I got on the internet. I don't know if it's Webster's. It says a mobile home is prefabricated structure that's built at a factory and transported to a permanent site. It's designed to be used as a dwelling and must meet certain criteria, including, I won't read all the criteria, but one of the criteria is, or two of them are being built on a permanent chassis. Number two is being designed for a long-term residential use. I won't go through the others. I'm not sure that this meets that criteria.
So my question is, why is he here?
That's still my question.
If I can make a comment,
Yeah.
to your point,
Why are you here?
he's on 43 acres in the middle of 300. I'm not sure who this would be detrimental to, especially since it's a trailer and not a mobile home.
I think as a dwelling, it makes their situation worse to call it a trailer than a mobile home, if you're going to ask me from a public health perspective, because then you're going to have you're going to have different occupancy issues that aren't us, but it's somebody
So
else.
what is,
He's
what
here
is
because he was cited.
cited for having a mobile home?
Cited for living in a mobile home.
During reconstruction, not after a flood.
Unpermitted, so, because well, yeah, if you want temporary housing in the town, right, you can apply for it through the building department, we can give you temporary housing for 180 days. You have to meet the sanitary, and where's the sewer going? Where's the sanitary connection? There's reasons why that we give a permit for. So when the house
Need a permit
burned
for a
down
mobile
behind Cliff's package store, right, they lived in a mobile home in the back. It was permitted. We went and we inspected it. We made sure it had a proper connection to the sewer, proper connection to the water. There's Board of Health issues that, okay.
Right. The Board of
So
Health's
that-
different than us.
Yeah.
No, but it's a building.
But
So
the
it's a-
violation is to have is that you have a mobile, the finding was by the building inspector, that you have a mobile home on your property. And I think that's what brought us here tonight. That's the issue, I think.
So let me,
So to your
Mobile
point,
home.
Mike, he can't apply for it, because the example that you cited was because of a fire. So it's either fire or natural disaster. There is no third option in this case.
There is no,
so I'm going to ask Mr. Bentley, can I ask you a couple questions? You're in the process of a renovation
Correct,
of the house.
right.
You said that 2/3 of it is being renovated, 1/3 of it is not.
No, 2/3
We're knocked down.
we knocked
Knocked down completely.
And the other third we gutted.
You got it. Okay. How long is this for? How long do you think the project would continue?
Hopefully, we're going to be done by February.
Hopefully to be done by February.
Right.
And when did you start the project? When did
When
did
we-
you have to move into a trailer from the demolition?
Well, I've been there since September,
Yeah, the end of September.
end of September.
Okay.
when was the building permit issued for the demolition?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you remember that?
When was the permit issued?
Not off the top of my head.
But it was in September, most likely, because that's when you started.
Technically, he's camping.
Yeah, on 43 acres. Do you have, now this is really not our purview, but
mean, if you wanna look
is
at it,
there a
Bruce.
septic system
Yes,
and
we
everything
have it
that it's
all
being
hooked up.
used
Yes.
from the
And
existing
the guy
house?
pumps it once a week.
No, there's a temporary holding tank. You can see it right there.
Oh, and somebody comes and pumps it off-site?
Right.
When they pump the portable toilet.
Okay, so you're not using a septic system that's on-site? Okay.
Although the septic is still there and operating, but you didn't choose to go that route.
Okay.
Is there a scenario where you can move in, when you're moving in, are you planning to do that when it's completely done, or are you planning to move back in as soon as you can?
Well, as soon as I can, but
It's completely done, says the general contractor.
We all know the old adage that as soon as you move back in, that's the point it's done. But the point that I'm getting at is narrowing the window on this because technically he's camping. He's going to be camping in the winter and you're going to have public health issues that are probably more significant than any of the zoning issues that we can come up with. Also, I think it's a variance personally, because I do think that this is a mobile home that you'll find under most concepts of zoning. We don't split a lot of hairs between travel trailers and mobile homes. Once you go to New Hampshire and Maine, I think you understand why. But to me, the provision that is his hitch in the giddy-up is about this is intended as a special provision to help people out after fire or natural disaster, something that's beyond their control. It is not intended to be a bypass for safe housing during renovation, in spite of the fact that I think 3/4 of this board has committed this at some point in their life per our conversation. So personally, I don't have an issue with it. He's on 43 acres. From a regulatory point of view, he's got some regulatory issues. This is where common sense and regulation don't necessarily go together, but a lot of people will say it's not a great idea to have people in campers in the middle of February because if they run out of propane or kerosene, whatever they're fired on, we do find.
Mr. Bentley, were you living in the house prior to construction?
yes,
You were. And how long have you been there?
20 years.
20 years. Okay.
And there's no Board of Health violations pending that we know of. I know
That we
we
know
can-
of, right?
Just for the record.
No.
I have a question, Mr. Bentley. I know the mobile homes that I had to live in temporarily with my cousins and my family when they were redoing their house. I'm assuming this is much more insulated and much more weatherized than the old ones used to be.
Yes.
Okay, so,
If I wasn't, I couldn't live in there.
exactly. What is your access? Are you hooking up to the electricity at your address?
Yes.
You are, okay.
What, Mike?
You're setting precedents. Anybody who wants to remodel a house in this town can go put a camper in their front yard and live in it.
Well, I'm just going by what the violation says and by what the definitions are not here, and I think when this council's here, they could even advise us. If there's not a definition here, I think you turn to definitions of Webster's or whatever for a definition. And
Well,
I'm
it
just
gets
going by the-
difficult, though, because otherwise this becomes, by definition, because it's a registered vehicle, it'll be a vehicle, and then he's living in a vehicle on the property, which, again, we start having.
I don't disagree with any of
It
that, but I'm
just
just saying the
becomes hard.
violation is for having a mobile home there in violation. That's the issue. It's a narrow issue. Board of Health, those are different issues. I'm not dismissing them, but it's just not our purview.
I still think that this is a mobile home. The fact that because people do live in these, the fact that it is not a double wide necessarily, or necessarily affixed to a permanent site. A mortgage company would never say that a mobile home, even if it's on a foundation, is on a permanent site. They would never issue that. No, we don't look at it that way.
But I also think you're talking about intent now. He's not intending to live in this passage.
I'm actually not talking about intent.
Well, yes, you certainly are.
If I
The
could finish my.
definition does intend.
Yeah, but if I could finish my sentence, what I'm actually saying, though, is that I don't think that it's really splitting it, I don't think we're really splitting hairs about, this one does not, he's not driving it, it's a fifth wheel. It's either a camper or a mobile home. I think they're actually very similar things. Whether they're prefab, it comes from a factory, maybe in Kentucky. It's not that, again, I really think that these are very similar products at the end of the day, except for this one also bears a registration, and you could look at it as living in a vehicle, which I don't think we allow either, not permanently.
Which isn't owned or registered by him.
I think the bylaw should be more specific and say mobile home or other temporary housing on site. I think I'm just going by what the zoning code says. That's what people go by. And if you're out there and you're doing these sorts of things, all you can do is look at the bylaw and say, well, mobile homes is, restricted, has some restrictions. This doesn't. What are they supposed to do? Just guess and see how we're going to interpret it?
Well, then at that rate, if we say that, at that rate, that would be something then the bylaw hadn't contemplated, so by definition, that would be a variance. Either way, I think because there wasn't the precipitating event, like the qualifying event that we've written into the regulations, that's the avenue that's available if it were a mobile home. If we were to consider it a vehicle, it has neither of those avenues, and he would be seeking the ability to live in, but I don't think he applied for
I see
that.
trailers throughout town.
Yeah.
Is people supposed to go, not me, but are others supposed to say, is anybody in there, and what's wrong if they are?
I personally don't care.
No, I'm just saying, I see the trailers on other properties. I don't know.
Typically, you can tell the difference between one that has regular habitation and one that doesn't, because they'll have a bottle outside, a propane bottle.
I understand.
And you'll see
Right, but
there'll be an electrical hookup that's permanent.
I typically don't see what I consider a mobile home on other properties. I see trailers on occasion.
Yes.
I'm just going by what the zoning bylaw says.
Mobile home is
all I can
much
go
more
by.
independent. They have their own source of electricity. They could be at a mobile home park. Many times they don't own the land underneath it. I think every time we have, we have an issue or someone in front of us, I think we give variances all the time, and that sets precedence every time we meet together. So, I don't know. I do know that we're in the middle of a housing crisis. ADUs now are allowed as as by right now, ADUs, I know for a fact we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and I think, I don't know, I'm going to consider that when I vote on this, so. If I would want to if I would want someone,
Do you have anything else you'd like to add to anything, Mr. Bentley? Do you have,
My questions are, what are the options here?
Yeah, what are our rules on camping? Can we call it something else and make it better?
Question, Mr. Bentley, when did you think you might be complete, that you could go back into the permanent residence?
Hopefully in February.
February.
Yeah, he said that.
Does your application say July of next year?
Yes.
The general contractor, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Are you anticipating any delays at all in the project?
I don't know what the weather's going to bring us.
Is
This
it,
is simply an appeal that's before us, though. He hasn't applied for anything else. So right now, we're
It's been
just...
cited, right.
Yeah, right now, we're just looking at whether or not this was issued in error. I don't think so personally, but I don't necessarily love the way it's applied.
I can 100% understand where the commissioner came by and did this.
Agreed.
I also can completely understand a homeowner's thought process in the scenario. Being there and done that in the past for myself. So the house I live in was gutted and we live in it, and that was done in 1980, and we lived in a camping trailer out back while the renovations went. The house was not habitable. You were habitating in the home, and this was a total gut.
Well, if I can add also, somebody mentioned the housing shortage. We looked into all sorts of options for Mr. Bentley, and there's not a lot. Not a lot. And so it kind of became kind of an easy idea that he could put a camper out there on a temporary use. It's not a mobile home. So, but again, a short-term rental, something for 6 or 7 months, not happening. Not in this state.
not in this area.
You have 43 acres?
Correct.
Have you ever camped on those 43 acres before?
No, never have.
Is it registered, is it,
I was hanging out in the house.
I tried.
I liked where you were going.
I tried.
I mean, I would argue he currently is, but
is it registered land? Is it six, is it
Chapter
60,
land?
is it chapter land?
It's not chapter
There,
land.
no, there's water on it.
Now, there's another definition here I just found. It says trailer home, including mobile home. This, to me, makes it a little confusing. Trailer home, including mobile home. And the definition is, a structure used as a dwelling, mounted on wheels with at least one axle. Structure may be either mobile or standing on fixed supports. But it's a definition of trailer home, including mobile home.
Okay. So that's both.
It's both, but the bylaw doesn't talk about a trailer home.
I don't think it needs to, though, if the definition is inclusive of both. Council? Council
So-
nods, okay.
If you do, would you put up?
Doesn't it say on the registration here, model camp recreational trailer?
How they market it has nothing to do with what our regulations call it. We have the ability to set our own definitions.
I'm sorry, did council have an opinion on it?
I did have a,
Do you have a
Elaine's
question?
going to display just a definition of manufactured home from the building code. But I made a copy of.
It's not a manufactured home.
No, that can be
It's
a
definitely
prefab, that
not.
can be
That's
anything.
a prefab.
Yeah,
So in the
A
definition,
manufactured home.
in the definition, manufactured home, mobile home is considered
It
manufactured
is,
home.
it is.
it is.
But that tow-behind trailer is not.
A manufactured home usually meets building code. It's fully
Correct.
plumbed, it's fully wired.
Correct.
They just comes in
Recreational
pieces and they put it.
So that's a recreational vehicle, that is
Correct.
not a mobile home.
Correct.
That's the two definitions. That's a
Correct.
recreational vehicle, it's an RV. It's not meant to be permanent. When you do a mobile home and you do a winter setup and you put hay all the way around the bottom of the thing to keep it from freezing, and it's all about Board of Health and
It-
people
it is.
being
It's
able
a-
to keep clean and showered and keep things.
Correct.
So I guess the first thing is we have to decide what that is. Is it a recreational vehicle? And the building code, we go to the definitions, it's not there, they go to the building code, it's not there, then you go to
I
the...
think our bylaws, though, where it says trailer home or mobile home, and it describes exactly what it is,
It doesn't say or, it says
And.
including. No, it says
Including.
Including.
including, and describes it as something on wheels. I think we've got a mobile home that meets our definition. I just don't, I think we're all sympathetic to the situation. I just don't see how we,
Well,
just close
I
our
don't
eyes
know
at
if it matters.
Does it matter?
I don't know.
Does it matter if it's an RV or a mobile home? The first question is, do we allow people to take and remodel their home and put a trailer in the front?
Or recreational
side yard?
vehicle.
Oh, it doesn't matter. The only time that we allow it in this town is if there's a catastrophe.
Right.
And then you have to file for a permit, and then it gets approved, and then the departments come out and check and make sure. So, I'm just telling you, that's how it's supposed to work,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Believe me, I feel for the guy. Look at, give him a limited time frame.
Sure.
I mean,
No, I hear what you're saying. Well, we're going to have to deliberate this. We can't give you an answer on the spot because we're going to have to discuss this and try and figure it out. So can we continue this to the next meeting? Sure. Violations don't,
Well, we have this here in open, and we have council. Can we ask them what they think? Do you mind? Is that okay? Can we ask what you think? Will you weigh in?
Of course you can. We're here. I think, and hello everybody.
Hi.
I'm Chris, and this is my colleague Tony.
Howdy.
We're here for the next agenda item.
Now you're here for both.
Warm up.
So I'll preface, I guess, our comments by saying we haven't devoted much in the way of thought to this hearing before sitting through it just now. But, as the hearing was going on, we also found the definition of trailer home, which is including mobile home, and that's a structure used as a dwelling mounted on wheels with at least one axle. Structure may be either mobile or standing on field supports. So this seems to me to fit that definition, and the definition is written in a way that I'm not sure makes a distinction between trailers and mobile homes. They seem to be effectively one and the same. So, we can certainly think about that more or But that definition seems to sort of conflate or combine mobile home and trailer home. I don't know that they're separate and distinct for purposes of the zoning, as we've seen it in the past,
Counsel, if I could
Okay.
just a follow-up, thank you. If the definition in the code said mobile home, including trailer home, and then I went to the bylaw and it referenced mobile home, I'd feel much more comfortable with that. But reading it this way, I'm not sure I understand the intent, I get all that, but
They give you a definition.
it's not, it doesn't follow the bylaw.
Right, the bylaw takes that definition and splits it to say, this is a mobile home where we allow
The bylaw didn't
mobile
reference
home.
trailer home.
It didn't mention trailer home. It didn't, so in reality, there's two different scenarios, correct? There's a trailer that's a recreational trailer that could be considered a trailer home, and there's a mobile home, which is more of a permanent structure that comes in on wheels and sits on a foundation and is winterized and all that.
I don't think,
But-
think about this for a minute. Let's think about the 80s when this was probably written. Let's go back a little bit. Let's think about this. What did we call them in the 80s? We called them trailers. They were trailer parks. Sometimes we called them mobile homes, but in terms of like common parlance, they were more frequently called trailers, but they were also called mobile homes. My thought in how this is written is because both terms were in common parlance probably at the time that it was written, and given that when we heavily regulated trailer parks, which was largely in the 80s and the 90s, because then we decided that it wasn't cool to live in trailers even though the rest of the country does it, and we went like all hardcore on it with Title V and all of that.
We don't want tornadoes.
But they're not magnetic.
They are.
They're not magnetic. But in any event, in my mind, I don't see the same intentionality. I do understand what you're saying. I get what you're saying and what you're saying about
Some of what you
order.
touched on, that this was, but along those lines, you made a good point. It was drafted by and adopted by the town, so it should be, in my view, be looked in, when there's ambiguity here, and we drafted it, the town, and adopted it at town meeting. If there's ambiguity, I would think you would look in favor of the applicant when there's ambiguity. They didn't draft it.
Yeah, I don't feel like
You
looking
gotta
at
hold
it
us to a
as,
we compliance of it, I would think.
I think it makes it
control
even
we draft
worse,
it, we
though.
adopt it.
I think it makes it even worse if we consider it a recreational vehicle that is, like
What I'm
from their
suggesting,
position.
a zoning change might be in order, but
But I don't,
Is
he's
either one of them allowed? Is either one allowed? And so why are we so hung up on whether it's an RV or a trailer?
I'm not
It's
sure
either
trailers,
one.
I'm not
Either
sure,
one
I'm
is
not sure an
allowed.
RV is prohibited, I don't see that.
living in an RV is prohibited.
You have to have a primary structure, right? So you have to have a house, and, if you want the kids to go out and spend the weekend in the trailer, yeah, but there's a house, there's a dwelling unit, there's a
Right,
sanitary
even from
means.
building code perspective, you can't, that's,
I'm just referring to the zoning bylaw.
I understand, but
We don't allow an empty lot to have a trailer on it to be occupied in town.
we don't even have to regulate it in the zoning because you don't get that far with it even in building code. And so a lot of stuff, just like he's been
Then my
making
question-
a
my-
lot of noise.
My question would be then, if I go along and I agree with you, my question then is, you're then arguing maybe he may not be in violation of that bylaw, but he may be in violation of something that's not cited here. So if he's not, which I could agree with, I'm not saying I do, but that's not what's before us.
I get that. I understand.
So until there's,
It's the wrong thing.
I'm not though convinced that he's not in
We need to carry
violation
it
of
over.
what's
Right.
before us.
Yeah.
I think we have to.
Yeah. Yes.
okay.
You talked about
Yeah.
carry it over and,
But if the chair made a motion to continue, I support that motion, but I don't know if that was a motion or not.
Well, it's not a motion yet, but because.
Who's entertaining the motion?
I'm entertaining the motion. But I think maybe we should make a motion and continue this to the next meeting.
I would second that.
Put the violation on hold until we can come back again.
And he gets another 30 days.
Yep.
But if he requests a continuation himself, then he can probably get to February if he games it correctly. Just telling you the strategy, sir.
Continue it tonight.
So,
All right, I'll make a motion that we extend this to the next meeting for 6 Baltimore Street for the appeal of the building commissioners.
so we can get some clarification.
Correct.
And
Need a
do I hear a
second?
second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much, Mr. Bentley.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Good luck and stay warm.
It was a pleasure.
Stay warm.
Get some farm animals out there.
Yeah, you need a cow?
Bees?
I would love
I'm
some.
down to 2. I'm only down to 2, so,
What are those for ornaments?
for now.
Yeah, I
You're only
see 'em
down
right
to 2
up front.
cows?
Yeah, I'm down to 2. I downsized because of Colleen.
I know. So what are you doing with the 2?
Good night.
Well, one's going in the freezer in January, so I'll be down to 1, so I'm not quite sure.
Don't they need friends
This is on TV, they
to be having?
Get a dog.
I
I
don't
thought
mind.
cows had like 2 to 3 friends that they like to have.
They do like friends, so I don't know if
They'll
I'll,
notify me.
Get them a friend,
so I'm not sure.
get her a
We
friend.
continue to 7 PM on the 18th?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. 7:05.
What do you think of the minis?
Yeah, make it 7:05.
You switch that over. 7:05?
Yeah.
Voted it?
Yeah,
Or
7:05.
7:05, okay.
All right. Our next thing is Town Council Workshop. We get all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Come on, give us some good stuff.
All right.
This is all about the 40Bs, is that what it is?
It is, it is. So hello, everybody. Again, I'm Chris Heap, and this is my colleague, Tony Riley. And we were talking to Rich about the idea that there may be some 40B projects on the horizon. And anytime we have that scenario in a town where it has maybe seen them in a while or has some new board members who haven't dealt with 40B previously, we always think it's a good idea to come out and just give a brief primer on 40B. So everybody sort of knows the ground rules when the application actually hits, because once the application actually is filed, the town is going to be under some pretty aggressive deadlines to get the hearing going and getting moving pretty quickly. So Rich sort of asked if we would come out and do that, and we're always happy to. So very briefly, I'll give you a quick rundown of 40B, legal standards, how to run a hearing, and ultimately the threat of appeal after a decision is rendered by the board. So just to start, purpose of Chapter 40B. Chapter 40B was adopted statewide in 1969, generally for the purposes of facilitating construction of low and moderate income housing. The way it does that is that it creates a streamlined permitting process that operates under a strict timetable and that allows developers to come to the ZBA to get one permit in the stead of all the various permits that the developer might otherwise require from various boards in town and under various sort of sections of the bylaws. Also to create a process by which local rules and regulations that might otherwise stand in the way of construction of affordable housing can be waived by the ZBA. So next, I'll go through the application, the sort of the permitting process for a 40B. The first step in the process is that any 40B applicant needs to apply for what they call a project eligibility letter from it's a subsidizing agency. And a subsidizing agency is a governmental or quasi-governmental agency that is going to provide financing to the project. The project eligibility process involves the subsidizing agency making a preliminary determination that a given project is going to be fundable if it obtains permits from the town. The minimum...
So an individual corporation entity can't fund their own 40B?
You need to have, unless it is I think the exception to this rule, the general rule would be yes. You need to have a subsidy of some form from a subsidizing agency. An exception to that general rule might be if there's something called a LIP, Local Initiative Project, where an applicant can come to the town, obtain the town's cooperation to allow the project to go forward. And with a LIP project, the town's cooperation is considered the subsidy for the project. So there's a funny, trick is not the right word, but if a project obtains local support before they apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals, EOHLC, formerly DHCD, would be the subsidizing agency, and there would be no money changing hands there, but the assistance provided by the town and the state would qualify as the subsidy in that circumstance.
Okay.
By fundable too, Dave, they typically mean it meets the eligibility requirements
Right.
to be fundable. You're not required to pull money from the New England Fund, but they do because the terms are
But
super
you
good.
qualify for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'd be kind of silly to walk away from that.
No, I hear you. I just.
But it just means that it's eligible so that you've got your minimum, it means that the deed restrictions say what they're supposed to say, that it meets the affordability requirements, that it's at the right income levels, and that the pricing is right, whether it's rental or the sales price.
Okay.
Minimum requirements for a project eligibility letter are minimal. They're up on the screen. It's that the applicant needs to be a specific kind of organization, which is a nonprofit or limited dividend organization. Again, the project needs to be fundable, and the applicant needs to demonstrate site control. The way and then now, when an applicant applies for a project eligibility letter, that's typically how the town first gets wind of a project being in the pipeline, because once the subsidizing agency receives the application, they notify the town. The town then has 30 days typically to review and comment on the application. We've just been through one of those recently in town. Typically what will happen there is that the town will gather all the various stakeholders in town, fire, planning, police, to get a preliminary take on what the impacts might be. Usually the town will then package those comments up in a letter back to the subsidizing agency for comment. The subsidizing agency will not often do much with those sets of comments from the town, other than issue an approval letter allowing the project to go forward, and sort of noting the town's comments as things that the applicant should be prepared to deal with in the ZBA's public hearing once that process gets rolling. So it can be a good preview of the issues that the applicant's going to need to tackle, but it's rarely a major obstacle for the applicant. In my practice, I can think of only one example in our towns where an eligibility letter has been denied by the subsidizing agency, and that was an example where the applicant was a developer with a long and demonstrated history of local bylaw violations, and the subsidizing agency in that one case actually took it to heart and said that individual developer could not obtain a letter in that case. But that's by far an outlier. Typically, these are not major obstacles to the project advancing. This is a list of things that the subsidizing agency will consider. Again, site control appears eligible for funding. There will be an initial pro forma for the project submitted to the subsidizing agency, and these are the things that they will look at. Once the project eligibility letter issues, the applicant then is allowed to apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a comprehensive permit. That letter from the subsidizing agency is effectively the gatekeeper to allow the application to move forward to this board.
Chris, does that eligibility letter have an expiration?
That's what I was just going to ask.
That's one of the things I meant to look into. I don't.
Pretty sure it's 3 years.
It's
Okay.
yeah. If I was going to say, I expect Rich is right that it's 3 years, and I was going to say it's going to be sufficiently long, whatever it is, that it's not typically going to expire anytime soon. Okay. So then, after the project eligibility letter is issued, the applicant is clear to submit their application to this board. And what they're applying for is a comprehensive permit. A comprehensive permit is one permit that is going to cover all of the relief the project needs under all of the town bylaws. Chapter 40B states that the Zoning Board of Appeals has the ability to act for all local boards in town. That definition is incredibly broad and includes any local board or official, including but not limited to Board of Survey, Board of Health, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Historical Commission, Water, Sewer, or other commission, fire, police, traffic, or other department, building inspector, or similar official or board, city council, or Board of Selectmen. And then it goes on to say, as if that didn't capture everything, all boards, regardless of their geographical jurisdiction, are considered local boards if they perform the functions usually performed by locally created boards. So, you get to...
Conservation.
What's that?
Conservation.
So I was, having just said how broad that definition is and how it covers everybody in town, I was going to give you two exceptions to that rule. One is Conservation Commission, and one is the Board of Health. In two specific cases, when those two boards are administering state programs. So the Conservation Commission applies the Wetlands Protection Act, which is not a local bylaw, but rather a state statutory program. And the Board of Health administers Title V, which again is a state program. So if a project needs wetlands relief under the Wetlands Protection Act or septic, the applicant would still go to the Conservation Commission and the Board of Health for relief to permit those two things. That gets even a little bit more tricky if the town has a local wetlands protection bylaw that goes above and beyond the Wetlands Protection Act, or Title V or septic regulations that go above the minimum requirements of Title V. In those cases, you would still need to come back to this board for relief from those local bylaws that build on top of those state programs, if that makes sense. So long story short, if there is a state regulatory program that is administered locally, they would still go to that board that does that work. Similarly, a 40B applicant would go to the building commissioner for a building permit after all of the permitting happens, because that's building code, again, a state regulatory program. But the lesson there is really, for practical purposes, it's the CONSCOM and the Board of Health that are the only things that...
Especially in this town, where they have...
Right. So you wouldn't be doing septic work or Wetlands Protection Act permitting as part of a 40B application. The application itself, it's important...
Sorry, Chris, can I just go back on
Sure.
that? On the wetlands and the septic, if I understand that the Board of Health can administer and control state regulations, but not the town regulations. Can we enforce town regulations on that?
So if the board... Yes, I would say that if the Board of Health had if a 40B project implicated Board of Health regulations other than Title V, I would say yes. And the project did not comply with those regulations, which is stated differently. The applicant needed waivers of Board of Health regulations other than Title V regulations. They would come to you to seek waivers of those regulations.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So
if we don't grant them, they may not get to do the project?
If you don't grant them, and this is, we will get to this in some detail, but spoiler alert, if you don't grant them, the applicant either lives with that component missing from their permit, or they appeal your decision to the Housing Appeals Committee. And I'll talk more about that later.
And we lose.
Yeah.
That's a strong case. We come in second?
What's that?
We come in second place?
We come in second.
Yeah, we come in second place in that case. Yeah.
Unless you got a strong case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like first, but it's it's second.
And as part of that, you may see requests for waivers of fees too.
No, that's next slide is
Waivers.
what to expect to see in your application. And this slide is really just here to flag the fact that the EOHLC has regulations covering just about all aspects of 40B practice. They have regulations that sort of define what should be included in an application for a 40B project to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Those contents of an application generally include preliminary site development plans, report on existing site conditions, preliminary scaled architectural drawings, tabulation of buildings by size, type, and ground coverage, preliminary subdivision plan, if it shows a subdivision, notably preliminary subdivision plan, preliminary utilities plan, project eligibility letter, and a list of all of the waivers that are being asked for. So a couple of points there. One, the regs also say that the applicant would need to comply with your local rules and regulations, which you've adopted under 40B. I checked, and your application requirements under your local 40B regs, are pretty consistent with the state regs. So I don't think there's going to be any real dissonance there, but oftentimes, a ZBA will receive a 40B application and be somewhat dissatisfied that it may not have the level of specificity or detail that you would expect to see from a special permit site plan review project. So we can talk about that when a given application comes in, but just be aware that the state regs say what goes in an application, and then goes on to say that if an application includes those things, it should be deemed to be a complete application and get the ball rolling on a hearing. So sometimes you got to check that you have everything you're entitled to when the application is filed, but it may be less than what you are used to in other permitting contexts. And oftentimes it is best to sort of look at the application, note what you want to see in the first session or two of a public hearing, and move forward with the public hearing rather than fight with an applicant over whether a piece is missing or not. Second point there is the applicant must submit a list of waivers with their application, and that list must include everything that they're seeking a waiver of. So that list really should guide a lot of the ZBA's review, because if a project complies with a particular zoning requirement or other requirement, it complies with the requirement. They don't need a waiver from it. The list of waivers really calls out the areas in which the project does not conform to our local rules and regulations and bylaws, and those are the areas in which the applicant is seeking relief. So then after we get through the filing of the application, next up is the hearing itself. If everybody retains one slide or one sort of set of information from this presentation, I think it should likely be this one. This is the timetable under which the ZBA must conduct its public hearing, starting from when the application is filed. Once the application is filed, the zoning board has, including Rich over here, has 7 days to send the application out to all the other boards in committees and commissions in town to make them aware of it and solicit comments back. This is important because, again, you are acting in their place. These applications are not going to be acted upon by the planning board or in some cases the Conservation Commission, but you can absolutely send the application out, make them aware of it, and solicit comments back, which could aid you in your review of the application. So within 7 days, it says that you send it out to all the other interested parties within Town Hall. Within 14 days, notice has to go out and be published. That needs.
So that's triggered. I'm sorry. That's triggered by the filing. We may, as a board, if we seen it yet.
Correct. Absolutely. You are absolutely right. You as individual board members are not tasked with this, but the notice is important. It is important that the notice go out more or less immediately, because the hearing, your hearing, must open within 30 days after the filing of the application, which is sooner than you might need to open a hearing if it was a special permit or a variance. Once the hearing is opened, the ZBA then has 180 days to conduct the hearing. That, depending upon the complexity or controversy surrounding the project, that could be plenty of time, or that could be very little time.
You can ask for extensions.
You can absolutely ask for an extension, but the extension requires the agreement of the applicant. So
We ask the applicant to waive their right to the statutory timeframe.
Yeah, and we've done that.
Yeah,
We've done
and they'll
that.
do it. And
Yeah, we've done it.
So, but just to be aware.
that 180 days stretches to 18 months.
For proper cause, for proper discussion.
Yeah.
Yep. So the absent agreement with the applicant, you need to do it 100 days. Yeah, as a practical matter, plenty of hearings go beyond 180 days because the applicant, understands that it owes you guys more information and needs to get it in if they want a approval or conditional approval. Once the hearing is closed, the ZBA then has another 40 days to vote a decision. And once the ZBA votes a decision, it's got 14 additional days after the 40 to file its written decision with the town clerk.
So let's go back a minute. Within that 180 days after the hearing opens, if within that hearing we ask for specifics or things that they haven't presented, and then they take longer than expected, can we close the hearing at the 180 days without them getting back to us?
Didn't have information.
We didn't have the
Incomplete.
proper information.
Incomplete file.
Incomplete file.
Yes.
Okay.
So kind of, not to play the game, but
And then how soon after that can they resubmit?
Reapply.
Well,
That's going to go to housing appeals first.
There's the
We get sued.
there's the I think brief answer and there's the longer answer. The quick answer is yes, you can deny an application for an applicant's failure to submit all of the required information. There could be a dispute, however, about what it is you're asking for and whether you're entitled to it under 40B. So I can't think of a good hypothetical off the top of my head, but
They're removing dirt, lots of it, from off-site.
cut and fill calculations.
Cut and fill calculations. I want cut and fill calculations, because we have an ordinance in town that you can't remove loam from
1,000
out.
yards. 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
1,000 yards per property. Unless it's agricultural.
We already have stuff, so we're going to question that. So like if all of a sudden, we know that it's a hill that they're doing and they want to put it down so that it's all nice, flat, we know that this soil's disappearing.
If they,
Where's it going, and what are the calculations on it? That should be something they should be able to get to us.
that would be
correct?
part of their engineering reports. If they wanted to play tricky pool about it, that's kind of not the, I mean, yes, they can always
It's a
play tricky
hypothetical.
pool with the
It's a-
plans, but that's why we do peer review with them. They get their professionals, we get our professionals, everybody gets together and decides whether or not they did okay math to begin with. And so it's not, if you can demonstrate that they're really just withholding information and playing tricky pool, and you've just got like a total garbage developer, that's going to go down a lot differently. If you have somebody who's taking a reasonable amount of time but has significant like site work and engineering calculations that they need to give to us, and we give them, and we're like, well, you have to have them by the next meeting, and we say the next meeting's in 2 weeks and their engineers fail, that's not going to be a reasonable reason
No.
to deny an application.
No, but 6 months would be.
6 months would be, but that's the point where they start screwing around in the program and get kicked out of the 40B program, and it's just a higher level.
As an example, in Norfolk right now, up on the Seekonk Street, the one that they're
Lakeside.
doing, Lakeland or whatever it
Yeah,
is that they're
Lakeland.
doing, they've had to blast, and they've had to blast several different times. They've had to take a ton of stone out of there. They've had to do a lot of stuff that was above and beyond. And I don't know if it was reasonably demonstrated in the permitting process as to how extensive that was going to be. And some of the residents have already been here to complain about it. So what I'm looking at is somewhere in the future, if we somewhat see that the site that's there needs some more information, I think it's in our purview to ask that, and they need to get it to
Yeah,
us
we
to a
have
degree.
we have the right to ask, and that kind of
so-
stuff they'll give us.
I think that's exactly right. But I'd say sort of two things too. In the hearing on an application, you should push for any information that you think is relevant. It's our job to sort of help you try to get it. When we're doing the training 6 months before an application comes in, our job is, I think, slightly different, and to sort of outline the difficulties that we might encounter and sort of the guardrails that exist around here. So if we were having that showdown, well, before we had that kind of showdown with an applicant about what information you wanted to see and thought you were entitled to, and they were pushing back and saying, well, no, we're not going to give it to you. In the 40B context, it might be important to be able to say what local regulation on the books presently entitles you to the information that you're seeking. In other words, do we have a bylaw in town that says applicants for land use permits must show cut and fill calculations and blasting reports? We may have those on the books, we may not, but in 40B, when having a difficult interaction with a developer, it is important to be able to point to the rule on the books presently that entitles you to the information, because what we don't get to do in 40B, well, what you can often do in special permit, site plan context, which are a little bit more flexible for the town, is just push for something that seems reasonable. Oftentimes when push comes to shove in 40B, you need to have a real regulatory hook on the books in the bylaws in order to get what you're looking for. So that's not to say you shouldn't ask, you should. But before we get to the point where we're going to think about denying an application for failure to submit an application, let's have a conversation.
It's like the difference between earth removal and engineering, where we're going to have regulations about it, versus like fiscal impact analysis, which we can't ask for. And so we don't have a regulation that says you can't impact the town's finances by existing, because otherwise none of us could live here. And so while that's completely off the table and people like asking for it, that's not on the table versus something that we're going to have clear nexus to, like earth removal, where we do have a regulation about it.
Yep.
When it comes to waivers, and we have a third-party review, do we have an affirmative responsibility to request waivers? If we think they're needed?
The applicant has the affirmative responsibility to request waivers from you.
So it was a project that we really didn't like the project for a lot of reasons, and then we didn't request waivers, and we think we had solid ground to request them.
Grant them. So you didn't grant them.
We didn't grant them. Right. We didn't grant them. They weren't asked for, and it got denied.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm just trying to I'm not trying to play a game. I'm just trying to follow what our obligations are. And I know in the spirit of negotiation, there's some projects you like and you want to work with, so you're going to.
So it's less whether you like the project as a whole or not. It's ultimately the board is going to need to consider is the economic impact on the project of denying one waiver, or denying a set of waivers, or denying all of them.
They didn't request the waiver.
I missed it.
They should have.
No.
They need to update their waiver request if they're missing.
That's not our problem.
You do not need to act on anything that is not requested of you in writing in the application.
Something you may want to, because it may be a pretty good project.
If they miss something and we want to tell them that they missed something and it needs to be in their waiver, that'd be a very nice thing of us to do. If they don't have something in their waiver, they get all the way through permitting. We've got some issues with whether or not we actually approved that waiver, because we are approving a set of plans, but we didn't necessarily, but the way, it gets messy.
I have had the experience of having a 40B developer sort of ask for an itemized list of 40 waivers, and then ask for a sort of omnibus waiver at the end that says,
And anything we forgot.
And anything that's shown on these plans that we didn't specifically call out. And
I like when they start with that waiver and don't call out the specifics and get lazy on you. That's my favorite.
I would not want you to grant that waiver. Right. The developer, it's the developer's job to identify what they're not complying with under our bylaws and
do a good job of it.
And do a good job of it.
Yeah.
So don't.
They frequently will need to add to the list throughout.
There's reasons why you may or may not want to call it out ourselves.
Yeah, usually the list gets added throughout the process, because either something will change, like we'll ask for them to change something, the peer review brings up a lot of stuff. Sometimes it just gets missed out the gate, but that list does get modified. Usually they kind of do start, like if they're lazy, you'll get a garbage waiver list to start with, and then it's a lot of work to go from there.
Yeah.
But it depends on who you get.
Okay.
I would say not your job to
Not our job.
to do their work.
Not
Make
Rich's
sure
either.
that they've presented their waivers.
Yeah, we're here once a month. They're there every day,
Right.
their job.
They're getting-
They've got
they're getting
engineers,
paid.
they've
We're
got-
I
not.
don't necessarily want to blow it out, hey, you should really ask for this waiver, because I kind of need it. you know?
Yeah.
Not your job.
You guys are all
So,
kind of
this slide's a good slide to talk about a couple of things, just in general terms. One is that we thought, in terms of hearing-wise, that we would start in the library, because this meeting room is not very large.
That's good.
That's not a
That's
problem,
better.
Rich. Not a problem.
It's not a problem.
It's not a problem if the small room is small.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be comfortable, Rich. That's not in the rules.
Well, so, while you all sit out there, you don't get paid for this, so you're volunteers. We all on the inside will hear from the public if you try to squeeze in a room where they can't get into in the hearing. So that's the thought behind, it's not necessarily the common developers.
Fine.
It's for the public and the residents.
What if you tell them it's for us?
We're gonna meet in the trailer. Come on now.
Gonna be in the trail, yeah. So that's one thing. So we discussed that. I mean, we could do it here if you want, but, you know.
No, we're kidding. We're pulling your leg.
All right, good, thank you. But what we are thinking about for you, in terms of
Snacks.
snacks, sure, is we are now in the age of Zoom. We do hybrid meetings, and we thought, well, the public might not like this. They need to be in person to attend the hearing
I completely agree with that.
and not try to do both.
Yep. Doing both is very difficult on a large scale.
See,
Yeah.
I
Especially
think
when-
that's,
So,
Being
so if you
asked-
want to attend as the public, you need to attend in person. You can't just Zoom in to that hearing.
It's
well,
not
they're
a
still
Zoom-
going to be
it's not a
televised,
Zoomable
right?
meeting.
It's
This
still
is just for
televised.
participation, that if
Yeah.
you want to participate, send us a
can
letter or
watch it,
come in
but they
person.
can't,
They can watch
They
it but
can't-
not participate.
yeah, they can't
Yeah,
ask
if you want to
questions.
participate, you need to be in the room.
Exactly, yeah, because otherwise.
Yeah, it'll still be
Oh, I thought you were giving,
televised.
us the option to.
Televised live.
No, no. I don't,
We're gonna be all on
I
the screen
don't
and they can
We're
come.
all going to be in a safe
We could
room.
use clarification.
yeah.
Clarification, what if it's-
Andrew, it's not live in the library, is it?
No.
No.
Okay. Yeah, it wouldn't be
Okay.
live.
I'd ask the chair to think about, at the start of the meeting, what the expectation is on the length of the hearing for that night. Because I sat through years
Yeah,
ago with
yeah,
Joe.
very long.
And I aged dramatically
Yeah, yeah.
during that process.
I have a lot of gray hair already. I don't know.
It does.
I needed 3 changes of clothes during one hearing. It was
Yeah.
Really?
over the caliber of a tree. My
Yeah,
only
we should-
thought,
Oh,
as
can
long as the
we
tree
agree
grows, I don't
to
really
cut
care
'em at
where it
10?
happens.
Yeah, we should have
10's
limitations.
painful,
So
but
expectations for the, because you go late, it's not fair to us, it's not fair to the audience, the residents.
Don't understand.
can we do
Yeah.
2-minute cutoffs too on comments?
I have to wear cutoffs?
No, if we've got like a lot of people who are saying the same thing, to do 2-minute cutoffs on the comments so that we don't have the same, like, the axe grinding.
Yeah, I think we can come up with some.
Give them their old Robert's rules,
Troll.
Robert's ground rules to
I'll get it.
start. Y'all behave, you get 2 minutes, don't be sassy, no egging anyone's houses.
Yeah, but in support of the comment that, I agree,
I'm gonna have my sergeant at arms.
We don't have the 11
handle
o'clock.
it.
Yeah, I'm gonna,
Right. Now, if it turns out, and also, in terms of the previous 40Bs, the crowd did reduce in size, and so eventually there was from the middle school came into here, so that's a
Oh,
possibility
yeah, it
too.
definitely.
it will have an ebb and
diminish.
flow
Oh, yeah.
of torch burning.
Depends on how many come at once.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope they bring snacks.
So you're
Now I'm just
thinking
stuck on
that
the snack.
first initial
Yeah,
opening is
in
the
the
big one,
library.
Is in the library.
yeah. So
And
Elaine's
you think the library's big enough for that?
the meeting room in the library is big enough.
Depends upon what the actual hearing's
Exactly.
for.
Exactly.
Usually that's just the getting to know you with not much public comment, so that,
I mean, Joe could attest this. I don't think the middle school is particularly great,
I don't like
Term-
the middle school.
which is where it was before.
Yeah, well, we've done it also in the
Too
elementary
far
school.
drive from us, from Seacon
It is.
Street.
Yeah, we've done the elementary school.
The elementary school is a little bit trickier
Okay,
to
you can
get.
zoom in.
I'm already only
I'll
getting
give
here
you a
at
ride.
7:02. I have to go
Carpool.
3 more
We should
minutes.
Have to
We carpool.
Right,
If we go to the middle school, we'll carpool.
okay.
But we've been reserving the library ahead.
It sounds great, Rich. Let's do the library.
I haven't been to that library room in so long.
It'll probably be remodeled by the time we
Same
get
size as
there.
this?
Oh, no, it's much bigger.
Yeah, they've done a lot of the school hearings in there.
Yeah.
Right, school
yeah.
board hearing.
You probably could fit
How are
100
the
people in
chairs?
there.
Let's get back to the,
Okay, sorry.
these
yeah.
guys are expensive.
No, I understand.
All right.
Budget for that?
So that's the timeline for doing the hearing. Just wanted to run through, there are cases in which, or scenarios in which the comprehensive permit application might be denied immediately. And I don't believe any of these apply here presently, but someday they may, so you should be aware of them. That's if you hit your 10% mark, if you hit your land area minimum mark, which is, I believe, 1.5% of the town geographically is occupied by affordable housing. Certified compliance with with the production under a housing production plan. Recent progress toward your statutory minimum, or if the project is a large project, which in Norfolk is going to be a project greater than 200 units. Or if a related application has previously been filed, which is to say somebody tried for a special permit, was denied, and then tried to turn it into 40B somehow, you can deny the project for that basis. So there's a couple of ways you can deny an application when you hit your statutory marks under 40B. If you have the right to do it, though, that needs to happen within 15 days after the opening of the public hearing. That can't be applied later on in the hearing process. So just something to be aware of there. But again, I don't think any of these apply presently. The other one to be aware of that is not on this slide is if you have three or more 40B applications pending, and those applications collectively add up to a large project or more than 200 units, you can stay your consideration of a project until you've cleared the backlog, and there are fewer than 3 pending. So there's a stay that can be applied there. Sorry.
So then a fourth one couldn't come in? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Well, they could apply, but
Yeah.
you would have the right to park that application.
Right, they're on
until-
hold.
Yes.
They're on hold till number 3 clears. So how many?
But if 3 don't reach that,
Got to keep going.
you gotta keep going.
Right. The standard is,
I always thought it
What do you
was
mean?
3.
If there's 3 projects
So-
and they only add up to 100, you gotta go to the 4th?
a board
Or
may
even 5th.
A board may stay the commencement of a hearing if 3 or more comprehensive permit applications are concurrently undergoing hearings before the board, and the total number of housing units in those pending projects exceeds the numerical threshold for a large project within the town. So it needs to be
And-
3 or more and 200 or more.
So let's say hypothetically you have 51, then you have a 59, and then you have a 200.
Give me those numbers
You're all
again.
set.
300.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the third one that comes in is the, well, yeah, because
Well, the
you'd be
third one.
staying.
So you have-
Threshold.
300 is deniable because it's a large project.
No, so it's 51, 59, 200.
So you have a grace period. So you get to clear up the third
You could at
one.
that point stay
Right.
any that come in after the
After the
200.
third.
Right, and if the 200 came in second, then the third one's on stay.
Correct. Or if the 200 came in first, the other 2 can go on stay.
Correct. Yep.
We still got to hear them at some point. How long
Oh,
does
yeah,
it stay
yeah.
for?
The
Yeah, but I'm only on the board for 5 years, and I've already been on for 3, so I'm thinking we can stay in for a while.
I don't know. Not to put you on the spot, is there do you know the stay period?
I got
Until you've, so there has to be 3 or more pending.
Right.
So if you have fewer than 3 or more pending, you got to take the next one up.
I have to admit, we've
Pending
never,
including an appeal?
I think that's pending before you as a board. Once you've filed the decision with the town clerk, up or down, then you're acting on fewer than 3.
no, I have to admit, I don't recall ever hearing more than one at a time in all these years. I think we only did 140B at a time.
Well, I think there's a
Is there
good chance
any
you're
right
going to
now?
make history then.
I've had a
Yeah, but
town,
that's gonna be really important to how we handle, if we have 2 to hear in one evening. We're gonna have to be real careful how we handle that, in terms of how much time can we give both applicants.
2 minutes.
We've had,
That's a fair, I mean, that's a practical
we've had
question, I
both 2
suppose,
at a
right?
time.
No, I'm saying, because the meeting starts
yeah,
at
we've
7.
had 2 at a time, Joe.
When do we have 2 40Bs at a time? I can't remember.
I know we did.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Had them open. You've had 2 or 3 open, but they weren't they were...
Not on the same night.
They weren't on the same night. They were successive.
Yeah, so we
in
had
other
extra
words.
meetings then in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, we ended
Yeah.
up doing more meetings then,
We were
okay.
doing more meetings.
Yeah, and I would venture to say we'd have to do that, too.
And
that- I
it's just PST.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, well,
I'll go through that again.
And I think that's a good practice point. And the next slide we had was like just some things to think about early on in the hearing, typically on night one or before, if there's an opportunity to talk about it with Rich and those supporting the ZBA. A couple things to think about. One is to try to map out a schedule for the hearing. Some hearings are easy. Some projects are not controversial, but others are. Both of those things. And if you are looking at a long, complicated public hearing, sometimes it makes sense to me to sort of treat night one as the applicant's opportunity to come in and present, take public comment, and then after that, you may want to say, night two of the public hearing is traffic. Night three of the public hearing is stormwater. Night four of the public hearing is civil engineering other than stormwater, whatever, architectural design, site layout, to sort of try to compartmentalize things. That's not always necessary, but it may be helpful, particularly if you're dealing with multiple applications at the same time, to sort of map out.
Okay.
And that's helpful for the board, that's helpful for the applicant, and then I believe that's helpful for members of the public who want to come and participate because they know how to, properly direct their comments and when they should get their comments in directed to a particular topic. So that's one thought for early in the hearing. The second thought is, we want to know early, I think the CBA and we want to know early who we're going to need to use for peer review, rather, what categories of peer review consultant we want to bring in, and ultimately who those people are going to be. You want to know that, the public wants to know that, and the applicant should know that because we need to extract the, peer review funds from the applicant. So, again, 180 days to hold the public hearing can be a perfectly adequate length of time, but it's not if you're not bringing in the peer reviewer until, the second month of the public hearing. So, early on, good thing to think about, who are we going to hire for peer review? And I guess the last one here is just get the comments from the other town boards, police department, fire department, et cetera. You want all of their comments into you, or asks out to all of those people to get
everybody, right?
to get their comments into you, so that you have those early on. Those can often be a helpful guide to what you're going to need to look at for the rest of the public hearing.
So two questions. One would be on the peer review side. Could we do the prep ahead of time, like, all right, anticipation of projects and talk about who those peer, just in general?
Would you wait?
Like for civil engineering, or if you wanted to have architect.
The applicant has to agree to them, and so you can kind of tap them on the shoulder and be like, hey, I'm going to give you a call, are you available? But you can't really fully tee it up, because they have to agree to it, and we have to have all of our hearings to be
So
like,
would you
hey,
wait
we
till
need
the
it.
first hearing and had a full presentation of it and then discuss it? I don't know.
It can be a little dicey because sometimes they push back on who you want, not necessarily who you hire, but what issues you want to hire on.
Sure.
And so they'll say, if it's early, you're premature in asking for that, you don't even know that you need peer
In reality,
review.
the board wouldn't really know
But-
until after the first hearing in reality.
And so, it's, the timing on it is usually a little weird, but you usually get everybody kind of in one package with your housing person, and then they have their stable of people that they tap that they work with routinely. Usually
there's-
that's what I do, but Rich may have a different process.
And there's only so many categories of peer review that you
Sure.
really would want to consider. Presumably, you're going to want a civil engineering firm to help you, unless you've got an engineering department. Some towns have an engineering department who are both capable of doing that and happy to do the work. But I
Never.
don't love the approach, because even if you've got the engineer in-house, we can charge for this work and have an outside firm do it. So I don't know that I see the value in adding to the burden of the local person.
The taxpayer paying.
But yeah, so civil engineering is presumably a category I would presume you would want to hire somebody on. Depending on the traffic impacts, you might want to think about traffic as well. Beyond that, there's really not.
Architectural.
Right, but sometimes the same firm has all these different criteria, all these
Yes.
different categories of
Yeah.
peer review.
Sometimes, but you usually want a better architect.
Right, I'm just saying.
Yeah, that one's.
You don't want that one, but if you care about the actual physical design, you want an architect.
I did want to ask you a question in terms of, so after the first one, as you get, would it make sense to post it too topically on the agenda so the public knows that you're, hey, tonight's traffic or
That's what you're
tonight's
saying.
civil?
That's what you're saying.
I would,
Post it or not, like, include that in the posting or not?
not
I would not
posting.
include it in the posting.
No,
if
because then
we
you're stuck
change-
to it.
Okay, that's why I'm
Yeah,
asking the question.
If we-
But online, on the website, if there's like a
Then we'll be
project
here with the
schedule.
hearing we can't have.
I might suggest that the board could choreograph a sort of like internal board discussion in a public meeting, not offline, at the conclusion of nearing the end of night one of the public hearing. Talk about what peer review you want. Talk about what you think the hearing should look like going forward. And even if you don't agree to that in a real binding fashion, at least you can give everybody, us and Rich, direction as to what night two would look like. So the applicant will hear it, the public will hear it, and then they'll understand that, your expectation when you send the applicant off at the end of the night is that, the night two is going to be a more detailed discussion of the stormwater or the traffic or whatever it
Get
is.
into wastewater.
It is that
Do
you've
wastewater.
identified as the sort of the most important next item on the agenda. So you can, without posting it specifically on the agenda, you can give the direction in a sort of more general fashion.
Right.
But
Because
so-
sometimes when we post a hearing and it should be a special permit, it goofs us out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
when
we
we
could-
open the hearing and advertise it, that hearing language itself is going to be set in specific, like the
Sure,
individual
yeah.
agendas after that are
Oh.
just going to be like the repeat of the address.
We could always put an advisory, so to speak, on the project page, like, it may, at that meeting, talk about this, but it's
Yeah.
not a guarantee kind of thing.
You know that they're going to request a project page, so some nonsense like that's going to happen, and just
Yeah.
put it on there, and then nobody's really stuck to it.
Yeah, all right, well, I think we'll handle it that way.
All right. So that's the sort of general outlines of the hearing, or at least the early stages of it. Now the legal standards that you're all going to be wrestling with. The principal legal standard at play in 40B is whether your whether your decision and whether our individual local regulations are going to be consistent with local needs. This is a standard that really we're not going to need to spend a lot of time with in your hearing, but it's the standard that the Housing Appeals Committee is going to apply on appeal. So it sort of hangs over all of what we're going to do in the local hearing and in your decision. Something is consistent with local needs if it is reasonable in light of the need for affordable housing in town versus local concerns like protecting health and safety, protecting open space, good building design, and preserving open space. Basically, it's a balancing test, which has on one side of the test the need for affordable housing, and on the other side of the test, all of our local regulations and interests in public health and safety. The catch here, although, is it's framed as a balancing test, as long as we're under 10% affordable housing in town, the balancing test is going to be heavily weighted in favor of affordable housing. So we'll come back to this a little bit when we talk about the appeals to the Housing Appeals Committee, but just a quick mention that that's the standard that we're all going to be talking about. All right, now waivers. This is not anything you do in other permitting contexts, but it is important under Chapter 40B. The key feature of a comprehensive permit is that the ZBA can, and in many cases, the ZBA kind of must, waive local requirements as expressed in the local bylaws and regulations. As we noted, the applicant is required to include a waiver list that specifies exactly what waivers they are looking for, and the ZBA is ultimately going to act on each and every waiver request that they make. Waivers can be of sort of a general nature, or they can be more specific. And the way I think of that is, an applicant for a 40B permit is likely looking to put in dense multifamily housing in a location where it's not allowed, possibly in a place where single-family housing on 1-acre lots is the only allowed use. So that's a waiver, right? They're looking for a waiver of the requirement in the zoning bylaw that only single-family housing can go there, so that they can put in multifamily housing at a higher density instead. That would be a waiver. Another waiver of a more specific nature would be setback. They need to build in a setback in order to make their project work. They ask for a waiver of the 20-foot side yard setback. They need to build a 50-foot tall multifamily housing building where the maximum height limit in the zoning is 35 feet. They need a waiver of the 35-foot height limit. So they basically need to tell you, again, each and every way in which their project doesn't comply with the regulations and ask you to bless it in the form of a waiver.
So just on that 50-foot, right? 'Cause-
Yeah.
So that's a state regulation, that's not a town regulation.
Then I gave you a bad example because they don't get to.
They don't get to
So
override, yeah,
disregard that hypothetical.
Okay,
If we've got a 35-foot maximum height
in the state.
requirement in our zoning bylaw, and they want to build to 38 feet, they would get a waiver to allow them to go 3 feet higher.
No, because the state doesn't allow over 35.
In-
So doesn't the state take precedence over the town?
Building code remains absolutely in place. They don't get to vary
No
building
waiver.
code.
Okay.
But there are certainly contexts in which someone could build a building higher than 35 feet.
Well, a high-rise,
They could, I mean,
you can build a different.
they could
type
come
of
in asking for a waiver
structure,
that would allow them to build a
High-rise
high-rise.
in the town.
They'd still need to comply with building code, but they would need a waiver of your height limit.
Like on the 50-foot example, they could ask us for a waiver from the height regulation, but they can't ask us for a waiver from building code for an elevator.
Exactly.
That would be the split.
Yep. Waiver, they only need to request waivers of specific regulations contained in the zoning bylaw and other bylaws. They don't need a waiver of, let's say, special permit criteria or other things that you apply to discretionary permits. They only need a waiver of subdivision regulations if their plan shows a subdivision. And that can come into play because oftentimes they're building a big project that you might think might trigger subdivision regulations, but if it's not a subdivision within the meaning of the subdivision control law, they wouldn't need waivers of the subdivision regs. And they only need waivers of rules and regulations that appear on the books in town. There are sometimes, general permitting approaches or conditions you might impose on special permits or variances. If it's just sort of an entrenched local practice that you're all accustomed to, but it's not a rule or a bylaw on your books, they don't need a waiver of that either. So that's waivers, and again, it's their job to give you the list of what those are. Conditions, just a couple things to think about when you're conditioning a project. You absolutely can condition a 40B project. There are a couple things you can't do. Conditions, this applies to waivers too, actually. A condition or a set of conditions can't go so far as to render a project uneconomic, and that specifically includes in the regulations conditions that require an applicant to fund public or off-site infrastructure improvements that are not generally imposed on market rate housing projects, that address pre-existing condition in town, or are disproportionate to the impacts of the project. And also, you can't impose conditions that reduce the unit density of a project unless you've got a compelling local concern, which is public health or safety reason to do it. You can't impose a condition that reduces density simply for the sake of it. Again, it has to be tied to an impact that needs to be mitigated. And this brings us to our next important concept, one of the last in the presentation, the idea of waiver denials or conditions rendering a project uneconomic. That is something that the ZBA's decision can't do in its decision. There are two categories here. We're not likely to be dealing with the first one. We are far more likely to be dealing with limited dividend organizations, which are how private developers organize for 40B projects. For those private developers who can't include conditions that make it impossible for the developer to proceed with the project and still realize a reasonable return within the limits set by the subsidizing agency. So there are, again, developer returns on profit for the developers, which if the decision causes the developer to fall below that, the decision, the condition or the waiver denial or the decision as a whole is going to be necessarily subject to being overturned by the Housing Appeals Committee in the case of an appeal. I should also note that you see sometimes now developers who come in with projects that are uneconomic on day one, which is to say that I believe, if I recall correctly, that a project is going to be uneconomic for an ownership project if the developer is going to realize less than 15% profit on its total development costs. You've got so you've got a couple different ways that could play out in your permitting process. Developer could be making 20% when they on the project they show you on day one. If so, the standard suggests that you can't impose conditions that would reduce the developer's cost below developer's return below 15%. But there are cases out there now where sometimes the developer comes in with a pro forma showing that it's going to be making 12, 11% return on the project that it shows up with on the first night of the hearing. And therefore, any condition that makes it more costly is going to make it more uneconomic, which is going to be a problem at the Housing Appeals Committee. There's a SJC case to that effect from the past couple of years, I think.
2 or 3.
So could we ask for a waiver from them on that?
So no, that
They would get it, but
that puts the board in a well, I guess two points there. That puts the board in a very, very difficult position in terms
Sure.
of being able to require things beyond what they're showing on their first set of plans. 2, however, it's not like that's what I would normally advise the board to do is conduct the hearing however it wants, talk about imposing conditions and acting on the waivers however the board thinks is most appropriate, and then you don't really get into the economics of the project early in the early half at least of the public hearing. You tend to get into it at the end, and the reason for that is that the how do we know if something's going to be how do you guys know? How do we know if a waiver denial or a condition or set of conditions is going to render a project uneconomic? We don't know that. The developer may allude to it generally, but we can't take their word for it in a public hearing. The way you ultimately wrestle with that is by asking the developer to share their pro forma for the project and show you, how much they're going to make on the project in various forms. The catch with that is that the board cannot, under the regulations, ask for the applicant's pro forma until a certain specific point in the public hearing. And that is generally late, and it's after all of these conditions here have been met. All of the board's consultant review has been completed. The applicant has had an opportunity to modify its proposal in response to what they hear from our consultants. The board has proposed conditions and what it's going to do on all of the various waivers. And then at that point, the applicant says, no, 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 the conditions you're looking to impose are going to render the project uneconomic. At that point, the board has the right to say, show us your pro forma. And they have to do that. The board can then subject their pro forma to expert consultant review and conclude either that they're right, the economics are what they say, or that they're wrong, and then the board can impose whatever conditions they feel appropriate. But it is important to sort of test that the applicant's assertion that relative to the economics of the project. If you don't want to take their word for it, you want to have the opportunity to test that and possibly test that through expert consultant review. Now, the catch there, though, is that you can't ask the developer for their pro forma until all of these conditions are met, and all of these conditions are not going to be met until very late in the hearing, because, as I said, this requires you to give them a draft set of conditions and a draft set of your action on their waiver list. That isn't going to be ready until day 170, day 175, unless you build in enough time on the back end of the hearing to allow for that. So if you think, this can vary by public hearing and vary by developer, but if you think you are going to need an opportunity to review their pro forma, you really want to have all of these action items completed with sufficient time remaining in your public hearing timetable, which would, I suggest, you got to build in at least a month, likely 2, to allow this to happen at the back end, which you might not otherwise account for unless you're ready for it on night 1, to sort of plot it out in a way that's going to allow for this to happen with time left. No, this is you're going to if you're not thinking about this early, you're going to run out of time to allow it to happen unless the developer agrees to an extension, which if you're at this point you are probably fighting about the economics of the project and the conditions that you're looking to impose that they don't like. So at this point, are they willing to agree to an extension? Maybe, maybe not, but you don't want to assume that they are.
So conditions we may impose would be granite curbing on a sideway, like where we just dealt with the development of the enclave, where the additional on Village Way, Village Green needed to be done. Those are conditions that we would be asking for above and.
We ask for those in market rate, though, so that is less sketchy than, because the granite
I'm
curbs are
asking.
public works.
It's the other way. They're asking for the waiver to not put the granite curb in
Yeah.
and to put the asphalt Cape Cod berm.
But
And
that's
what they want to.
within their development, though.
No. That's part of their cost. They want to lower their cost. They're going to ask for a waiver because we require in a subdivision a granite entrance, right? So the waiver will be, we want to do asphalt.
I hear what you're saying, Mike. What I'm getting at is, that's all within their development. Where we want some other things off-site, off their development,
That's mitigation.
is that,
Yeah, you can't.
That's what I'm asking.
I just thought we just read that you can't do that. You can't take
You can't
from
do
the
it,
project and put it to different.
you can't require off-site mitigation that is any different than you would from a market
Right,
rate
but if you-
development. If
but-
there is nexus, you can do, and they agree to it, it gets dicey again.
There's some, but the thing, let's just say you wanted a little section of sidewalk done outside the project, because that's for public safety. This project's gonna connect, let's say, there's a train station, but this little strip of sidewalk is important. We can discuss that with them.
If
And they agree
they,
to
so
do it.
we probably have a public works specification that would actually require that sidewalk connection anyway, and so they would either be looking for a waiver from the construction method, if it, like, let's say we require concrete, and they're like, we want to hot top that Betty to save some money, and we're like, oh, well, that's the thing that's going to make the difference. It's not, but that's where they'll either look for a waiver in terms of material, dimension, width of the sidewalk, or the existence of it, the necessity of
But
having
the first
it.
goal might be identifying that we want it,
Yeah.
and then they may ask for a waiver about it later in the
The
process.
waiver is only if it's required to begin with. Usually so it really depends on whether or not it's required to begin with. We can ask for it as a mitigation,
right.
and that's probably not going to be the sort of thing that renders it uneconomic. It's when you really start getting into, like, all the buildings need slate shingles, wood siding, windows like my house, and like, it's stuff like that where you really get into beautification. Granite curbing throughout might be dicey. I mean, I know we do it because of the plows, and it actually it's a better product long-term, and it's cheaper long-term. But we could still require it on, like, the outside and the apron, because,
Yeah, but you're talking about.
Yeah, you're talking about.
I'm still talking, I'm talking about like what Tommy just had to do
Well, so that
at
would-
Village
I
Green.
understand that, but they're coming to us with a list of waivers. We're not going to them with a list of things we'd like you to do, so bring us the list and let us work off the
Then we'll
list.
discuss it,
And
right.
then we'll discuss.
They might ask
There
us-
may be a little bit of both. I mean,
yeah, there's both, let's not
honestly,
lie.
I mean, that, your scenario is the better one, because as long as we have a bylaw, rule, regulations, construction spec on the books, they need to comply with it, or ask for a waiver from you, and you have to grant the waiver. That puts you in the driver's seat, because they're asking you for relief. If there is no bylaw, rule, regulation, construction spec, et cetera, on the books in town, and that thing remains something that we think is important, we can ask for it, we can negotiate for it, but we're in a difficult position to
require-
extract it if push comes to shove with the developer.
Right, because we don't have it on the book.
So for example,
So,
in the subdivision, we require 2 sidewalks on both sides of the street. if the board, and they request a waiver from, and the board says, well, you need to reciprocate by provide sidewalk outside the development.
To tie
because-
back into this, like
To
we
tie-
did for Tommy, right?
All right,
Down to-
I see.
So-
Now I
so
see
Usually
where
the
that's coming
sidewalk
from.
comes from transportation mitigation, and we extract it at that point when we do the traffic
I think-
study and not,
Okay.
not just out the gate with, we want a sidewalk. We got to tie it to something, you know?
Well, that's what I'm, there's an example where the
No, I-
requirement is X and you're gonna get something.
I see what you're saying. That makes sense.
It's all a
It's
negotiation.
It's a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Yeah.
We don't want to say that, but
Not
yes.
necessarily in a public
No.
hearing.
Not a public.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to say that.
But that was something like back, this was even before 40B. That was something we always wanted to do with new developments, was try to get that other side of sidewalk brought outside the project to other places.
Yeah, so in the-
Increasing connectivity between different developments.
That's not gonna happen without us giving them relief.
No,
Well,
correct.
their role is
So
not,
depending what you give for relief is what you're gonna get back.
well, and their role isn't necessarily to fulfill our long-held hopes and dreams when they
No.
come to town with a development, but if we have reasonable nexus, like there is a traffic concern where that sidewalk connection can provide a multimodal connection, that's in fair
To the
play.
school.
Yeah, that, those sorts of things are in
those type
fair
of
play,
things.
but otherwise, if it's different than how we would treat a normal market rate development, then, we don't have the rules to stand on, then we're not being fair.
Which also speaks to the value of having a good peer review engineer who will stand up for the board and sort of, point out the importance of things, which is not always easy to find, but, if you're looking for that sidewalk connection because you all think it's a safety issue, we would want the consultant to say it's a safety issue.
Yes,
Because
we
if-
would.
Because if we all think it, but the expert consultant doesn't include it in their report, it's going to be hard to,
Not that a traffic study has ever been steered.
Right. So before we get to the point of talking about things outside the project, though, it starts like you said earlier. They should be coming to us with a whole list of waivers, which starts the whole process. Once we have all those waivers, we
Right.
have a starting point.
yes.
Right. And if they wanna come back with more, because then they can come back.
Right, right.
They get more than one bite at the apple.
Right. But most of the ones we've done, they've started with a list of waivers. We've had that pretty much.
Yeah, that
You
should be in
must
the
have that on
application.
your-
You gotta have that.
Yeah, it's required.
Again, I
Because
remember not.
that's
It's
what we're
just a
doing.
difference of how robust they are.
They
that you
can't
see
put a 40B
variation
in
on.
without a waiver because they're definitely not
Right.
meeting the criteria.
The whole thing is a waiver.
Some
Yeah, the whole
projects,
thing's a waiver
Right,
in
they
reality.
wouldn't be meeting us if it wasn't for a waiver.
Yeah,
They
40B with no
wouldn't
waivers.
meet this board. The
Correct.
whole idea of this is to
That is fundamentally
streamline it.
the biggest thing you're doing here is acting on the waiver requests that will allow the project to proceed.
Correct, correct.
I fundamentally disagree. I think the front yard additions we do periodically are definitely top priority.
I meant in a 40B here, not in the other stuff.
Also pulling your leg.
All right.
All right, just a slide on things to think about during the hearing, but I think we've covered, most of this already. The board's decision is by simple majority vote, not a super majority like you might see with special permits and variances. Again, importance of filing the decision making the decision 40 days after close of public hearing and filing it 14 days after that. And then, again, just the board can impose conditions on the
So
project.
some majority would be 3 versus 2, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the thing that hangs over all of your work on a 40B project is the
deny.
the threat of an appeal. If the applicant is unhappy with the board's decision, they have a direct appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee, and they can do that within 20 days after you file your decision. If others are unhappy with the ZBA's decision, other than the applicant, they may also file an appeal, but they don't get the benefit of going to the Housing Appeals Committee. They must go to Land Court or Superior Court, like they would with any other decision of yours that they want to appeal. So only the applicant gets to go to HAC. On an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee, if you deny a project outright, the standard of review is that whether the project complies with federal or state statutes or regulations or with generally recognized standards as to matters of health, safety, environment, design, open space, etc. So in a denial, the legal standard is not really whether the project complies with your bylaws, but, I mean, for lack of a better word, whether the project is going to work without being too awful. So, yeah, what I would expect in the case of a denial is their engineer is going to hit the stand and say, stormwater works, the building functions properly, it complies, it works well enough, even though it doesn't comply with your bylaws. That's the standard, the threshold showing for the applicant in the case of a denial. In the case of an approval with conditions, which I think is far more common, I think it would be our advice that just about any project, 40B project, it would be better for the board to approve the project with conditions rather than to deny it outright. I could sort of think about that more on any given project, but again, better to condition a project heavily in a way that makes the applicant change it in a way that'll suit your preferences than to deny it outright. In the case of an approval of a comprehensive permit with conditions, the threshold showing for the applicant is whether your conditions or your decision as a whole make the project uneconomic. If they make that showing, either that it complies with generally accepted standards or that the project has become uneconomic, it becomes the board's burden to show that there's a valid health, safety, or environmental design, open space, or other local concern which supports the denial or the conditions, and that that local concern outweighs the local need for affordable housing. The catch here is, again, though that sounds like a balancing test, as long as we're under 10%, that balancing test is going to be weighed heavily in favor of the applicant and the affordable housing that they're going to produce with their project. The Housing Appeals Committee, you talk about the leanings of the Housing Appeals Committee, and it's hard not to sort of veer into hyperbole, but they are not in the business of upholding ZBA decisions that complicate or prevent construction of affordable housing. They are just not. Their standard of review is heavily weighted in favor of approving projects, not sustaining denials or conditional approvals by boards. My most recent experience was at the Housing Appeals Committee was with two different projects that sort of were permitted in lockstep about a quarter mile away from one another, same developer, two different projects. Developer appealed both, challenged about 10 different conditions that were opposed in both projects. And my sort of initial take going into those appeals was, all right, we got 10 conditions being challenged in two different permits. Surely we're going to lose on most of these because that's what you expect going into the Housing Appeals Committee. But also, surely we're going to prevail on some, and we did not have great luck. Despite putting on a great case, the standards of review and the sort of inclination of the Housing Appeals Committee is, again, just very, very heavily weighted in favor of the applicants. So that is understanding that and what sort of awaits at the end of a decision that the developer is likely to challenge is just important to keep in mind from the outset, because although it is important that the board act on the waivers and impose conditions as it thinks best in the interest of public safety, it is also important to have a realistic understanding of what is likely to survive on appeal and what may not be. So that's just something we can always talk about more in hearing, but the overall threat of reversal at the Housing Appeals Committee is substantial.
So a denial of one waiver request is denial of the entire permit. It could be if you didn't negotiate and condition it out, but
no. So that's I can imagine a scenario in which you grant a developer asks for 10 waivers, you grant 9 of them and deny them 1. Say, they wanted to build in the setback, and you say, no, you can't build in the setback. You've got to move it outside of the setback. Everything else you asked for, we're okay with. We're denying you that 1 waiver. It is plausible that the developer in that scenario could say, I got enough of what I needed. I can build that project and I can go forward. I want to pull a building permit in 30 days. Doesn't make sense for me to appeal that one issue. Conversely, they might say, they might say, they have a conditional approval, but they say, no, we really think that one denial out of 10 is worth fighting over. They can take an appeal on that one issue.
So
The
if it-
finance. They just lost 10% of the project.
But before you get there, if that happens, and we just say, this is our decision, 48 waiver requests, we're fine with 47, this one, other one we don't do, there's our decision, is that an approval or a denial?
That is an approval.
Okay.
So, yeah, so no, you can frame a decision as a approval with conditions. Those conditions can be significant and onerous on the applicant. That's still an approval for purposes of those standards of review. They can challenge that if they want to. But again, actually that, and to me, that also underscores the importance of, when we were talking about the pro forma, sharing the condition, drafting the conditions that the board wants to impose, and building in enough time in the hearing so that that draft set of conditions can be distributed to the applicant. Applicant then has an opportunity to object to some or all of the conditions that you're looking to impose, and tells you that, at the next session of the public hearing. The board then has the opportunity to react however it wants to those objections. It can address them. It can leave your draft decision conditions exactly as is. That's up to you, but at least if we build enough time in the hearing to allow that to happen, you, and I think more importantly, we understand what conditions are likely to draw, to be sufficiently costly to the applicant that they might draw an appeal.
So like Michael was saying, 48 waiver requests, we're fine with 47, approved, that one's denied. They appeal an approval, they're probably going to go to his test on the financial capacity of the project with that waiver denial.
They would need to show that that one waiver denial renders the
Well,
project.
if it was sideline distance and they're meeting
Whatever
four
it is, but that's
sidelines
probably
and
their
they
best-
lose 4 units, then it's a
That's where they're
financial
gonna go.
hardship.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about the money.
So, again, in that scenario, they might appeal, they might not.
Yeah.
Well,
depends
we'd
how
have to
much
sort of
is in it.
test that
Yeah,
as the hearing goes on.
Okay.
Right. And you won't know that till you see their books.
Many times they don't appeal they accept the waivers that we give them, and then they sell the project. I will dealing with somebody else next time they come, so.
That happens all the time, too.
That's right.
And it is, there are 40B developers who, I think, just or primarily permit projects.
Of
Exactly.
course they are.
And
They
then
just get to that
sell the
point.
At
permit,
it too.
then sell the permit to the developer.
Yeah, of course they are.
Developers develop.
Ted,
I don't know how good they are.
he did it twice so far.
So going from the level of detail in the plan, that could be post-approval in terms of, going from, not construction level, that happens.
So they're all preliminary plans that we're working
Yeah.
with. But then when they come back with the final, do we get another bite at it?
So it is something that you wrestle with in comprehensive permits because the plans are more preliminary generally than you're used to seeing in other contexts. You can write a decision that says you need to come up with a final set of plans before issuance of a building permit, and then the building commissioner is checking to make sure that they've gone from preliminary to final in a way that is consistent with the permit you've given them. I haven't done one in a while, but I believe I have done permits that say come back to the ZBA for sign-off on the final plans. That, maybe the board needs to see them, and maybe the board can trust that level of review to the building commissioner. We
I
can,
think, yeah.
but in any event, every permit I think we've worked on would have a set of conditions that sort of outline the process for the developer to take after the comprehensive permit's issued, to take their preliminary plans and get them in final form in a way that still allows for some town oversight of the final version of the plans.
So it's more like, I guess the question, so can the consultant do that on behalf of that's a big workload for the commissioner. I have to do all that, right? From preliminary to look through, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like a overburdening.
Oh, no, the peer review should be the one that does it.
That's what I'm-
Until it gets down to an actual final building plan, and then the building inspector would look at, but I believe that the peer review would do,
Is that,
I'd want to think about that, but that may be possible.
yeah.
This says-
Because, we have a part-time second person and a full-time,
Yeah.
we don't have,
There's an ability after the
four.
fact, at the expense of the developer, to hire additional services
Well,
for
you-
inspection
you-
and plan reading.
You can hire a third-party agency if the town says that they can't inspect the project, then the developer's responsible for a third-party agency to do all inspections. We see that all the time in high-speed projects. You know, we're doing a Costco now, that in less than 3 months will go from ground to, they're gonna be selling stuff Black Friday. I mean,
Are they really?
Oh, yeah, there is inspectors on, there's 100 guys there. They're building that building in 90 days, all right? Inspectors
Just like
there.
a Walgreens.
Third-party inspections, so, yeah.
So we better noodle on that, please.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that you can, the
You
peer
can.
can definitely,
Yeah, all right.
because I know that we can assign third-party agencies.
And
That's what was done
and sometimes different projects sort of vary a little bit, by the time you get around to issuing the permit, what the delta is between the plans that you have in hand and the final plans. Sometimes there's a big gap, and sometimes they're pretty close.
Yeah.
So the level of review that might need to happen between
Right.
permit and,
We could be talking a 200-unit apartment building versus a 6-lot subdivision.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's a huge difference. A town guy can handle a 6-lot subdivision. 200-unit apartment building is not feasible.
absolutely, no. I don't think I answered the question adequately earlier. You can, if the building department needs assistance reviewing
They can get help.
plans that are sort of beyond the scope of what is typically reviewed in town, then absolutely,
Yeah.
we can.
And also with inspections, if you need people on site more often, or at specific things like during pours or concrete and stuff like that.
So, okay.
Don't worry. Otherwise, yeah,
I just- you know,
especially when you got a few under
Said there's a pretty large
construction.
apartment complex, right, that
Yeah.
come in, and if that's something that's not seen in this town regularly, and
Right.
they don't do that type of review.
Rich, any idea on if we see this, if and when?
Well, we don't have a letter yet, so.
No, they haven't applied for an eligibility letter yet, so,
So we don't know.
best I could tell you is 25.
All right, and just two more points from me, and then I'm done. This doesn't affect the board exactly, but it matters for the town, certainly. Once the permit is issued, all of the units go on the SHI when the permit's filed.
As of the approval.
As of the approval. Once it's filed with the town clerk, those units are
For the
eligible.
building permit, not the zoning approval. They have to pull a building permit for the actual units to get on the SHI.
I don't believe that's right.
No, I
Oh,
don't think so.
I thought it.
I think
could
it's
be out of
our
date.
approval.
No, so the units are countable once the comprehensive permit is filed for 12 months.
And
And
then
then
they
if no
fall
building
off.
permit is pulled after 12 months, they fall off the SHI.
Okay.
If a building permit is pulled within 12 months, they then stay on for another 18 months, and if no CO is issued after 18 months, then they fall off again. So they can be on and fall off and then come back on, depending upon the timetable, but
There we go,
those
yeah.
units are counted.
And that's been the case here.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know.
Yeah.
12 months is pretty quick for a 40B. And then finally, this does implicate the board, but again, not until long after hopefully you've issued the permit. Applicants will often come back in for changes to a comprehensive permit after you've issued it. And the process here is kind of funky, so I just wanted to mention it. The applicant asks your permission for project changes after you've issued a permit. They do that by letter. Often it's pretty informal and not always terribly informative. But they outline the changes that they want. You then have 20 days, I believe, to determine whether the changes they've asked for are substantial or insubstantial. If you decide that they're insubstantial, all you do is notify the applicant of that finding, and then the permit is deemed amended. You don't have to actually issue an amended permit for insubstantial changes. It just sort of happens by operation of law. If, however, you decide that changes are substantial, you tell them that, and then you notice a new public hearing, and you're back doing a full-blown public hearing on just the requested changes, not the project as a whole.
again.
all over again.
So in reality, if they gave us 48 waiver requests, and one of which is the double-sided sidewalks, the sidewalk on either side of the road, and we give them 47, but we want sidewalks on both sides of the road. We've deemed that that's very important in Norfolk. They say, okay, let's do this. Somewhere down the road, they decide that the way that our housing is laid out and the way that the garages are and everything else, sidewalks on both sides just aren't feasible to do, and we want to call this an insubsequential change, and we deny it and say it's a substantial change,
Then you gotta go to a public hearing.
then you have to go to public hearing on that.
So, yes, and although the caveat to that is that the regulations have like a set of examples about what constitutes a substantial change and what constitutes an insubstantial change. And they're not necessarily intuitive, at least to my mind. The regulations say that an example of a substantial change is an increase in the number of housing units, an increase in the height of the building by more than 10%, which suggests that an increase of the height of the building by 8% could be insubstantial, which seems to me to be incorrect. But that's what the regulation says. So substantial changes are increase of more than 10% in the height of the building, increase of more than 10% in the number of housing units proposed, a reduction in the size of the, never mind that one, change in the building type, and a change from one form of housing tenure to another, so from ownership to rental or vice versa. So the way those are outlined suggests that any number of changes you might think are substantial might qualify as insubstantial. But in any event, you would make your own determination about that, and if they didn't like it, they could go up to the Housing Appeals Committee.
So we have a possibility of something coming before us that is a substantial change to the original permit down on Pine Street. Or do they remove themselves from the original permit and start with a new permit? You're not familiar with the Pine Street one?
No, he's not.
Not off the top of my head.
So a portion of the proposed site includes a previously approved 8-lot subdivision, a 40B subdivision.
Okay.
So, take the site and kind of in the middle of it, that's 8 units of ownership. They've requested the extension in terms of time to exercise it. But that would be a brand new application.
They'd remove the first one or the first one. Is there implications?
Do they have to withdraw,
removing?
I guess?
Do they have to withdraw?
Are they planning to
Or
do
does it
something different
lapse,
than 8 units, or, oh, okay.
what
so
happens? So,
they
like,
have a different project
We've
that they want to
approved,
build.
there's been an
They
approval
just don't
of
have
an
to.
8-unit, but they've acted on it by means of site work and stuff, but they haven't started the build. They've since taken property around him and have a thought process of possibly coming with this piece and all these together to make a different. Is there consequences to a developer removing something like that and coming back for another? Because it's a time restraint and it's a burden on the town in one sense, but yet it might be beneficial to the town in another sense.
I see what you're saying.
But is there verbiage or something in the original or in the state thought process of approved, gone through the approval?
Yeah.
We don't want to be changing these things beyond.
No, they can change them if they want to, but I would say that and this may be dodging the question slightly, but I would say if they tried to do that as an amendment to the original permit that you already issued,
Yeah, I would say that would
absolutely be at a minimum. Possibly that should be a new separate application that starts over from scratch. But at an absolute minimum, that would be a substantial change to the original project.
Okay.
Which would allow you to that one's not a close call. If they tried to treat that like an amendment and you were willing to work with that analysis, it would be substantial. Public scratch. They would need to identify all the waivers. You would treat that, it would be indistinguishable from a brand-new, full-blown public hearing. So it would sort of be, that seems to be better done as a new public hearing where they somehow disavow their original permit. But either way, you would be...
But are there consequences? That's my question. Are there consequences to a developer removing themselves from a project that the state's already deemed acceptable? And now they're removing themselves from it.
Does it extinguish?
So this is how I would look at it. You already got 8 lots. You're already in the queue.
Right.
I would be going and taking my spot in the queue and making an amendment rather than going to refile and the chance of being behind 200 already and you can't get in the door. The door's closed because we already had some. So
Did they acquire more land as part
Yeah,
of
they
it? So,
bought-
I mean,
they
this is,
bought up
it's still,
lots
it's a
around.
new project. There's no, there's a new project. They started as an 8-lot subdivision unless they're coming in with the,
None of that's really my question. My
Yeah.
question is,
is there any
my
penalty?
question
No,
is
because
there a
there's no,
penalty?
nobody
from
says
the
you have to
state
build what you proposed.
Okay, so there's not
You can
a
pull,
penalty.
it's still, in that respect, it's still a free country. You own the land, you're allowed to do what you want with
You
it.
can
Maybe
let it
you
go.
had one idea, you went through, you permitted it, and you said, oh, upon further reflection, this would be cooler if I got more land and built something bigger, which sounds like that's probably what happened. There's no penalty because it is still your right as a property owner to control that land and do what you see fit. So somebody could waste our time as many times as they want, provided that they have enough capital to change that project enough to make it something different and not a repetitive petition. Because if you bring the same schlock twice, we can say no to that. But otherwise, if you can just infinitely change, they can, yeah, you can waste our time indefinitely. It's like submitting 68,000 FOIAs to DOT. What does it mean? Nothing. It's just a waste of everybody's time, but it's what we do sometimes, you know?
So, and
That was my question.
There you go. There's no penalty. You can be a ding-dong.
But you already wrote the decision on that project as well.
Yes, that project's already been decided.
If I'm not mistaken, that when we write decisions on projects, we write no extension of the project into
Their extension
area.
rights
So
are
no
by state law.
expansion, right? No expansion, no extension.
Extensions are...
Without going back.
Extensions are controlled by
filing.
state law, though, on the permits. We can say things like on a
He means
special permit.
expansion of the project.
No amendment.
You can't take.
We don't have that
He's looking
right.
for the size.
I'm saying the size.
You're
If it's
talking
8,
time, he's talking-
And you go back for it to make it 15, if we wrote in that there's no
But it's also
expansion.
8 on a
there's
specific
an
lot that
expansion,
we
be
approved.
substantial
The lot was a
change
certain
anyway.
size when we did this.
Correct.
Having a new size for the lot really changes it quite substantially.
Oh, I-
Different
I don't-
subject property for even the notice.
I don't think you can actually.
It's a
do-
hypothetical scenario in this case,
No, it is.
because
I'm just-
I think it's a dual.
I was just curious if there was, so if I'm developer A and I come to you and I say, okay, let's go through this comprehensive permit, and I go through all the motions, we get everything all approved, I'm up doing some site work and everything else, and all of a sudden I was like, you know what, I think this would be a great horse farm. I just pull out and I make it a horse farm. And there's no consequences to me at all.
No.
Absolutely
No.
not.
That is
And
your
you
right.
lost a lot of money.
Maybe not.
Well, both, yeah, one for the lesson, 2 for the.
No, the conditions that you impose on any given project are tied to the project that the person or applicant wants to build. So if they disavow the project entirely, in
Yeah, they have
almost all
timeframes.
cases, the conditions would go out the window.
They have certain timeframes to act on it, or it goes away. It's
Yeah.
They don't
not
have to.
indefinite.
No, I was just curious
He did
because,
act on it, though, obviously, he did do
He
site
did act
work.
on it.
He has an investment there. He definitely has an investment.
and there's probably a reason for that.
And if this was a whole do-over anyway, a new permit, right? We'd have to go through the regular timetable of everything, right?
Yeah.
But if there's a substantial change that we open a hearing for, is there a new timetable when there's substantial
Starts
change?
over.
It starts over. You get 180 days.
Even with the substantial
Yeah.
change?
Yes,
Yes.
that's.
Okay, got it.
So there's no advantage to the.
Okay.
They might as well
Alright.
just apply for it as new.
I'm sure the other lawyer will try to figure a way to
The
do
only
this.
advantage to it is
Right.
if they were in the queue and they only wanted to go from like 8 to
50.
12 or something. It wasn't a substantial.
I'm thinking the lawyer on that side would try to figure out the best way to continue that project, whether it's to start all over or to...
It wouldn't be an 8-lot subdivision if they were looking for a good project.
Right, but I'm trying to say, but the lawyers are going to say, how are we going to represent this project to the board?
How many other, there's 2 other parcels that were bought there?
I think
Or
3.
3?
Is that the fellow that ain't got any water?
No, I think there's,
No.
That's a different guy.
I think there's 3 or 4 parcels.
Yeah, nobody's got water. My stream is
I can
like-
fairly confidently say it's going to be a
I've never
brand
seen it.
new,
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
brand new project with a brand new
6 feet wide normally?
project eligibility letter.
I'm sure it'll even have a brand-new name.
No, normally. Brand new name. and so
Cranberry Bogzilla Heights.
forth. No, none of that. None of that.
Over the different place, different place.
Because the grass around it is all so nice and green.
That's all I got.
Anyway, do we have any questions?
Questions?
I think we had a lot
That
already.
was my, I kind of wish there were
Penalties.
penalties
Yep.
for entering into a project such as this and then
Doing nothing.
doing nothing.
Well,
There
is.
unfortunately
money
is no
spent.
penalty for being an asshole in this life.
It's a lot of money to
Well,
file.
I'm not
that in the
arguing a
zoning
lot of money. I'm not arguing a lot of money.
Oh.
But in reality, if somebody bought a piece of property, we'll say that in our eyes, once it's developed or in the process of being developed or approved, is now worth $2 million, but they bought it for a couple $100,000 and they put, $1 million into it. And now they say, okay, it's approved and it's worth $2 million, but if I want to put my house up on this $2 million piece of property and have a $4 million home up here with horses and everything else, it's worth it. But there's no penalty to that. I find that interesting that the state can impose all this and then not hold anybody to.
There is no accountability for the developers that submit spite projects
Correct.
with illusory site control just
You
to
have a
waste
driver's
people's
license,
time. It happens, it's a
Building
tactic,
permit, you don't have to build.
but hopefully we don't attract
You don't have to
any of
go to
them
the
fellas.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Draft the conditions in a way that are triggered before commencement of site work.
Prior to the issuance of a building permit for such and such, the applicant shall do blah, blah,
No,
blah.
That could only be so many types of conditions, but comprehensive permits will typically say, these are the conditions you need to meet before you commence site work. These are the separate conditions you need to meet before you pull a building permit. These are the other set of conditions you need to meet before you
20% of your COs are issued.
Right. So you can, that might address it, but only partially. That doesn't come close to.
No, we shun them, Dave, and we fist of fury at them. We make fun of them.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that tonight.
No, anytime.
Thanks a lot, yeah.
Thank
That
you
was
all.
very
No, I
informative.
appreciate that. That was
Thank
good.
you.
I'm
Can't wait.
not necessarily looking forward to these, but, I did join the zoning board to do something. I guess we get to do something now, maybe, other than deny somebody.
Careful what you wish
Oh, I know,
for,
but you
Dave.
made-
People are gonna, you're close to this
The only
too. We're
difference
getting
is-
egged. We're getting
The only
toilet
difference is
paper
we
in the
get-
trees,
We do it 2 or 3 times a
rocks
month,
through the
though.
windows.
Get some minute meetings around, go.
Do we have minute meetings that we need to?
Yeah, and
There is
what
one.
happened with the sidewalk?
And the
It's
schedule.
done. It looks
done. It
great.
looks good.
Why didn't they come in for, they were supposed to come in,
I thought that
don't
curb
think
was
they-
going to be different.
Free run.
yeah, I thought so too.
I thought
No, the curb in front of, on Cleveland Street's different.
Oh, no, it's not, it's Cape Cod berm, it's not a bread loaf.
No.
I went last night and looked.
You guys explained all that.
They did
Cribbage me last time, and I-
extend it to Rockwood.
Thank you.
Yes, they
They
did.
did, and.
Thank you, guys.
And
Thank
they
you.
put the 1-foot grass berm in, but nowhere did they take into account the vehicle pedestrian. So I kind of
I
thought
missed,
they were
so
coming
I,
back.
That's
so
what
I
I was
missed
waiting
the,
for.
so I missed the bread burn because I went and I looked
whole
at the
length
rest
was
of it.
gonna be the
Yeah,
bread
I
burn.
missed
The whole
that.
thing's supposed to be
On
bread
Cleveland
burn.
Street,
Right,
supposed to
and
be
it's
the
not.
bread burn.
And it's the same as all the way around Village Green, which we agreed to let it go on Village Green, but we did not agree to let it go.
Right, and we actually wrote, that's in the minutes, isn't it, the
I
bread
think
burn?
so. I
Of
think
course
so,
it is.
yes.
No, it is.
I know it is.
I read it.
No, you guys educated me well on that.
So I'm just curious why
I didn't catch
they didn't
that.
come back. Because I thought that had to be signed off by a certain date. If we
The
only
15th?
gave them,
Yeah, we gave him an extension,
right?
though.
did
We gave
for
him
30
till the,
days,
yeah, we gave him till the end of November.
I think, yeah.
but we're not meeting again, so.
No, right.
Okay, all right, we've got deliberations, town planner updates, meeting minutes, correspondence, new old business, and next meetings. Let's do it, y'all. Who's ready?
So I think Mike has a good point, and that is, at our last hearing, which we had the special hearing on
Right.
the development at the Enclave of extending the sidewalk to Rockwood Road and putting the loaf, the bread loaf and the grass berm and the mailboxes. They moved the mailboxes, I did notice that.
No, okay.
I
we
think they
said that
did.
The mailboxes had to go the direction of the road. First one in is going parallel.
I'm not sure, but.
So I do know that,
I think we left them, if I remember, the mailboxes were up to,
If it goes in the 1-foot grass strip, it was to go parallel to the road.
Which I think it did,
Which,
perpendicular.
perpendicular to the road. When I went last night, the first one is
Oh.
the other way.
but I think we left the mailboxes up to,
Only in
Case
Village
by
Green.
case.
Only in
Right,
Village
case by
Green.
case, we said, right?
Only on Village Green.
yeah, that one could be a gray one, I think. Only because it might be determined upon the mailman, too.
How about the curb?
The curb is totally a mess.
I could certainly tell, on the mailbox, they were perpendicular on Cleveland Street, and the homeowner
Turned it.
turned it.
Okay,
The homeowner wanted them turned.
that's fine with us.
Yeah, so that, I do know that.
But the
Go fight
berm,
'em.
It's not in the walkway. That's the
Right.
only thing.
Correct.
I
But the
take
berm-
out. It is in the roadway.
This line I think you're talking
It's
about.
not in the
Yep.
walkway.
Correct.
yep, the bread loaf berm will accommodate the extra, clarify the sidewalk with the bread, and that did not happen.
So that was part, is a safety issue.
Yep, the sidewalk was that, so realistically, that Seekonk section of sidewalk was to be ripped up,
Cleveland.
Cleveland, sorry. What did I say,
Rip
Seekonk?
it- Rip it up.
I live
Move
there.
it
I know you
into
do.
Yeah.
to the abutters.
Yep.
Put the grass berm,
Yep,
put the bread loaf.
yep.
And all I
And the
see-
bread loaf is
All I
not
see
there.
that they did was move the sidewalk in 1 foot, put a little grass strip, and leave the Cape Cod. And like I said, the plows are just gonna make that street entrance 40 feet wide now, and just, like,
They
that
will.
mailbox is gone. Like, there's no, and there's no vehicle protection coming off of 115.
Yeah, no, that bread berm did not happen. So I don't know how we'd go about that.
It's probably something to look into, but probably, it's not on the agenda. We're gonna get in trouble for talking about it.
Well, no, but pointing it out is something we should ask to. do some
Follow up
sort of- do a
for,
follow-up
yeah.
based
As the
on-
building commissioner,
based
go
on the
take a look.
observations, make some
Yeah,
follow-ups then. That's all we can do.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's all we can do at this point.
no, well,
Well,
Can't change.
no, it changed.
The minutes are one thing.
Wait a minute. The last meeting, didn't we say that they were extended till, we gave them a date. So they have a date to make it right.
It's either November 15th or 30th, I thought,
Yeah.
of November.
Oh, here it is. There was a motion made to extend the permit to November 15th for the paving. This was a
For the
mo-
paving of Cleveland Street, creating a sidewalk from Rockwood Road's existing sidewalk to Village Green's new sidewalk, and moving mailboxes under the direction of the DPW crane.
Okay, so
under
they
the
did
Director
pave.
Bill Blackcrane.
What's the date on the berm?
Not the date,
See,
it's
we-
the description, that's wrong.
Yeah, the description,
So what do we do?
We asked them to look into
our
it.
motion didn't have the berm in it, it looks like.
Can review the tape.
That's what I was gonna say, you could look at the,
Yeah, review the tape, but there's not much we can do at this moment about it. It just needs more research.
Because the builder went out, came up with the solution, came back and presented us the solution.
Correct.
That should be.
That should
Yeah,
be.
we may not want to approve the minutes right now then. You might want to review
Well-
that motion.
Yeah, we need to have that motion reviewed.
Review the motion.
Yeah, just to see if,
See the
because
tape,
there's
see if the-
there's no bread
Brad Wolfer.
loaf berm in there.
I'm just wondering.
We
if he's
have it in the
potentially still
minutes, but it's
working.
not in the
If she
motion.
thought that November 15th was the drop date for the pavement, but I don't know, I haven't looked, I don't know what the situation is, whether or not
I
it's
mean-
potentially still under loaf
does-
construction.
Yeah, it's not loaf, it looks like everything's complete
Okay.
for what they have deemed to be complete. Now, whether that means that they're still coming back to do the loaf, and I don't think they are, but it
So
looks
it's something to
complete.
check out.
It looks completed as far as they're concerned.
Okay.
Well, here's the very specific here. Blair stated that he understands the concerns for safety on the sidewalk and will put in a 10-inch bread loaf berm from Rockwood Road to Village Green.
Yep,
It's the first sentence on the paragraph.
that's in the minutes.
That's in the minutes.
That's in the minutes, but not in the motion.
I think I think it could be considered that that was part of what the request was.
I would agree with you.
Yeah. They just need to go look at it then. Staff does, go take a look, see if he's done, and if not, add him to loaf it up, sir.
I think the minutes need to reflect, I think the motion in the minutes needs to reflect the loaf berm.
If it was said,
If it was voted that way.
if it was voted
Correct.
that way.
I agree.
Just check the minutes. At the same time, though, I mean, Blair's intent was to do this, even with this type of a motion, correct? We'll find out what it says on the tape, maybe. But Blair intended to do it based on what he presented to us.
That's what I would assume the intention was to
So
have
how
it
can we
done.
follow up with Blair?
That was our understanding.
Yeah, I think
So
we
it's right
should,
here in the minutes that he
Yeah, I mean,
said,
I'll have to
actually, he
ask
said to
him.
us he would do it.
I think we should just.
And it's now
ask-
after November
You can
15th, so there's...
ask Blair and send us an email back, that'd be cool, and we'll see what else we need to do. Maybe, maybe
it
they're
says
still
the
working,
Blair
or
stated that he
maybe,
would
maybe
do
they thought they were clever, but I'm sure a loaf is gonna happen soon, once, that investigation occurs.
I don't know.
We're gonna loaf it up, it's gonna be great,
Oh, I will, yeah, I can follow up on that.
but,
Do you have any updates on the town planning?
No, not tonight.
You were about the calendar for
All
next year?
right. Approve minutes.
Calendar.
We're not going to approve the minutes until we
we'll
look at
hold
that
those, and
over.
we'll watch that beautiful bean footage.
And
Calendar.
we don't have any correspondence?
No love letters, that's so sad.
How about any new old business review 25 board member meetings
Dates.
dates?
That is something we'd like to vote on.
Oh, are we still
Do we
thinking
have a list of them?
third Wednesdays?
There's not a list on there?
There's no list here. Just as the next meeting is December 18th.
That's about as much foreshadowing as I need in my life anyway.
I'll put it on for December then.
Okay,
To vote
pick
for
some dates.
2025.
Okay, that sounds like
Because the other
fun.
thing is, I'll need to have you vote the time at 7 PM, because technically your regulations still says 7:30.
Oh, bogus. I go to bed at like 8:30 usually.
Wow.
How'd you know? How do you know you went to bed at 8?
He didn't, but just like, I'm pretty open about the fact that I'm like, all right, let's wrap it up, I gotta go to bed.
Bees were over at 8:30.
But not worth
All right.
making a deal about it.
That's
Do
hard.
I hear anybody
That's
make a
too late.
motion?
Make a
But if
motion to
everybody's
close the hearing,
commuting, that
close
makes
the
sense,
meeting
too.
For, what date is this? November 20th at 9:20 PM.
Any seconds?
Aye.
All approved?
Aye.
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 So moved. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.